Most people would have driven past. Daniel Cross almost did. On a rain-soaked October night, his headlights caught something that would haunt him forever. A young woman sitting alone at an abandoned bus stop, blindfolded, shaking, and sobbing into the storm. Every instinct screamed to keep driving, but the thought of his 8-year-old daughter asleep at home made him stop. That single choice would unravel a crime, destroy a carefully constructed lie, and quietly rebuild 3 broken lives into something none of them saw coming. Stay until the end, and drop a like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The rain came down like a punishment. It wasn't the soft, cleansing kind that washed away the dust of a long day. This was cold, relentless, angry, the kind that soaked through clothes in seconds and turned every surface into a slick, treacherous trap. Daniel Cross gripped the steering wheel of his 15-year-old truck, the wipers beating a losing battle against the downpour, and felt every one of his 35 years pressing down on his shoulders like wet concrete. His hands ached. His back ached. His entire body was a map of exhaustion, each muscle a testament to another 14-hour day of carpentry work that barely paid enough to keep the lights on. The job site had run late, again, because the contractor kept changing his mind about the cabinet dimensions, and Daniel had spent the last 3 hours on his knees, making adjustments that should have been caught in the planning phase. But he hadn't complained. He never did. Single fathers with 8-year-old daughters and mounting medical bills from last year's emergency appendectomy didn't get to complain. They got to work, come home, help with homework, pack lunches for the next day, and then collapse into whatever sleep they could grab before the alarm went off at 5:30 in the morning. The clock on the dashboard read 10:47 p.m. Lily would be asleep by now, curled up in her bed with the stuffed elephant he'd bought her 3 Christmases ago, back when things hadn't been quite so tight. Mrs. Chen from next door would be on the couch, half watching whatever cooking show she favored, waiting for him to get home so she could shuffle back to her own apartment. She never charged him much for watching Lily, said it kept her company since her husband died. But Daniel always left $40 on the counter anyway, even when it meant his own dinner would be whatever he could scrape together from the back of the fridge. The highway stretched empty before him, a dark ribbon of asphalt cutting through farmland that had long since been abandoned to weeds and rusty equipment. This route saved him 15 minutes compared to the main road, and 15 minutes meant the difference between 5 hours of sleep and 4.5. He was thinking about Lily's science project, something about the solar system that was due Friday and that he'd promised to help with tomorrow night, when his headlights caught something that didn't belong. At first, his exhausted brain couldn't process it. A shape at the old bus stop, the one that hadn't seen service in over a decade, ever since the county rerouted the line. The shelter was barely standing anymore. Its roof partially collapsed, the bench inside rotted and broken. But someone was sitting there. Daniel's foot eased off the gas pedal instinctively, his truck slowing even as his mind tried to make sense of what he was seeing. At this hour, on this abandoned stretch of road, in this weather, it didn't make sense. Nobody came out here. There was nothing to come out here for. As his headlights swung closer, the details sharpened into something that made his chest tighten with a feeling he couldn't immediately name. A woman. Young, he thought, though it was hard to tell from this distance. She was sitting on the remnants of the bench, completely still except for the violent shaking that ran through her entire body. Her clothes, what looked like a light jacket and jeans, were plastered to her skin, so soaked that water streamed from them in rivulets. Her dark hair hung in wet ropes around her face, and there was something over her eyes, a blindfold. Daniel's truck rolled to a complete stop in the middle of the road. His hands remained on the wheel, his mind racing through possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. People didn't just end up blindfolded at abandoned bus stops in the middle of nowhere at 11 o'clock at night in a rainstorm. Unless someone put them there. The thought sent ice through his veins that had nothing to do with the temperature. His first instinct, the one that rose up from some deep, primal place concerned only with self-preservation, was to keep driving. Whatever this was, it wasn't his problem. He had a daughter at home. He had responsibilities. Getting involved in something like this could mean trouble, could mean danger, could mean complications he absolutely could not afford. But even as that thought formed, he was already putting the truck in park, already reaching for the door handle. Because he kept seeing Lily in his mind. Lily at 8 years old, small and trusting and completely dependent on him to keep her safe. And he kept thinking, what if someday, years from now, his daughter was the one sitting alone in the rain, abandoned and terrified, and the only person who could help her drove past because it was easier than stopping? What kind of world would that be? What kind of man would he be? Daniel grabbed the emergency rain poncho from behind his seat, the one he kept for job sites, and pushed open the door. The rain hit him immediately, shocking in its intensity and cold. He was soaked within seconds, the poncho barely helping as he jogged across the road toward the bus stop. "Miss?" His voice came out rough, uncertain. "Miss, are you all right?" She jerked at the sound, her whole body going rigid with fear. A sound escaped her, not quite a scream, but close, a sharp intake of breath that spoke of pure terror. She scrambled backward on the bench, her hands coming up defensively, and Daniel could see now that they were shaking just as violently as the rest of her. "It's okay," he said quickly, stopping several feet away, holding his hands up where she couldn't see them, but hopefully could sense them in his voice. "I'm not going to hurt you. I was driving past and I saw you sitting here. Are you hurt? Do you need help?" She didn't answer immediately. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps, and Daniel could see her entire body trembling, from cold, from fear, or both. The blindfold over her eyes was dark fabric, tied tightly enough that it pressed into her skin. "Please." Her voice was barely audible over the rain, thin and broken. "Please just leave me alone. Please." The desperation in those words hit Daniel like a physical blow. This wasn't someone who wanted to be here. This was someone who had been abandoned, left, discarded like trash at the side of the road. "I can't do that," he said gently. "You're going to freeze to death out here. There's no bus coming. This stop hasn't been in service for years. Whoever told you to wait here? He said the bus would come." The words tumbled out of her, fast and desperate. "He said to wait right here, that it would come, that it would take me somewhere safe. He said—" She broke off, and Daniel watched as the realization seemed to wash over her, visible even through the blindfold and the rain. Her whole body sagged, and a sound emerged from her that was worse than any scream, a low, broken sob that spoke of hope dying in real time. "He's not coming back," she whispered. "Is he?" Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "No," he said, because she deserved the truth. "I don't think he is." The sobbing intensified, her whole body curling forward around the pain. Daniel stood there, rain pouring down on both of them, feeling utterly helpless in the face of such raw anguish. Every second they stayed here, she was getting colder, more hypothermic, but he couldn't just grab her, couldn't just force her into his truck. She was already terrified. "My name is Daniel Cross," he said, keeping his voice as steady and calm as he could manage. "I'm a carpenter. I live about 20 minutes from here with my 8-year-old daughter, Lily. I was just driving home from work when I saw you. I have a phone. You can call whoever you need to call, or I can take you to the police station, or the hospital, or wherever you need to go. But you can't stay here." She had gone very still, her head tilted slightly as if she was trying to assess the truth of his words through tone alone. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet he almost didn't hear it over the rain. "I don't have anywhere to go." Something in Daniel's chest cracked at those words. He thought of Lily again, thought of his daughter safe and warm in her bed, and then thought of this woman, this girl, really. She couldn't be much older than 25, sitting alone in a rainstorm with nowhere to go and no one to help her. "Then come home with me," he heard himself say. "Just for tonight, just to get warm and dry. My neighbor's at my house watching my daughter. You won't be alone with me. In the morning, we can figure out what to do next. But right now, you need to get out of this rain." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the relentless drumming of water on concrete and the old shelter's broken roof. Daniel could see her weighing his words, trying to decide if this was another trap or an actual lifeline. Finally, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. Daniel moved forward carefully, extending his hand even though she couldn't see it. "Can I help you up? The ground's pretty slippery." She hesitated, then reached out blindly. Her fingers were ice cold when they found his, so cold that Daniel felt a surge of alarm. How long had she been sitting here? Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely grip his. He helped her to her feet, and she swayed immediately, her legs barely supporting her weight. Without thinking, Daniel wrapped an arm around her waist to steady her, and felt her entire body stiffen with renewed fear. "It's just to keep you from falling," he said quickly. "The parking area is right over there, about 20 steps. Can you make it?" She nodded again, though her breathing had gone sharp and panicked. Daniel guided her slowly across the broken pavement, acutely aware of how vulnerable she was, how completely she had to trust that he wasn't leading her into another nightmare. The weight of that trust pressed down on him almost as heavily as his exhaustion had earlier. His truck sat idling in the rain, headlights cutting through the darkness. Daniel opened the passenger door and helped her inside, where at least the heater was running. She collapsed into the seat like a puppet with cut strings, her entire body still shaking violently. "There's a blanket behind the seat," Daniel said, reaching back to grab the old moving blanket he kept for protecting lumber. It wasn't clean, but it was dry and warm. He draped it around her shoulders, and she pulled it tight with trembling fingers. Daniel circled around to the driver's side and climbed in, immediately cranking the heat up as high as it would go. The cab of the truck filled with the sound of the blowers and the drum of rain on the roof. He put the truck in drive and pulled back onto the empty highway, his mind already racing ahead to what came next. He should take her to the hospital. That was the logical thing, the safe thing. Let medical professionals check her for hypothermia and injuries. Let the police get involved and take statements and do whatever it was they did in situations like this. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she'd flinched when he mentioned hospitals and police stations earlier. Maybe it was the bone-deep certainty that this woman had been failed by someone, probably multiple someones, and that throwing her into the machinery of official processes might just grind her down further. Or maybe it was just that he remembered what it was like to feel utterly alone and abandoned, and he couldn't bring himself to hand her off to strangers. "What's your name?" he asked quietly, keeping his eyes on the road. A long pause, then, Elena Moore." "Elena, it," he repeated, testing the name. "Can you tell me what happened? Who left you there?" Another pause, longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of someone who had moved beyond feeling into pure survival mode. "My husband." The two words hung in the air between them, somehow more horrifying for their simplicity. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Your husband left you blindfolded at an abandoned bus stop in the middle of nowhere in a rainstorm?" "Yes." "Why?" This time, the pause stretched so long that Daniel thought she might not answer at all. The truck's heater was finally starting to work, filling the cab with warm air that seemed to thaw something in Elena along with her frozen limbs. When she spoke again, her voice cracked with the weight of everything she was holding inside. "Because he wanted me to disappear." The story came out in fragments, disjointed and painful, like shards of broken glass that cut both of them as she picked through the pieces. Elena Moore had been blind since birth. Not completely. She could sense light and shadow, could navigate familiar spaces with confidence, but she couldn't see faces, couldn't read expressions, couldn't drive or work most conventional jobs. Her world was built on touch and sound and memory, on mapping spaces through repetition and trusting that the people around her weren't lying about what they described. She'd met Marcus Moore 3 years ago at a support group for people with disabilities. He'd seemed kind, patient, understanding in ways that most people weren't. He'd described himself as a financial advisor who worked from home, someone who understood what it meant to need accommodation and flexibility. He'd courted her carefully, patiently, describing the world to her in detail, reading to her, making her feel seen in ways she never had before. They'd married after a year. It had seemed perfect. "I didn't realize he was lying about everything," Elena said, her voice hollow. "About his job, about his finances, about why he was so interested in mine." She'd had money, not a fortune, but a substantial inheritance from her grandmother, along with disability payments and income from her work as a jewelry designer. She worked by touch, creating intricate pieces that people said were beautiful, though she'd never seen them herself. The work sold well enough that she'd built up a savings account that represented security, independence, the ability to take care of herself. Marcus had slowly, carefully, convinced her to consolidate their finances. For convenience, he'd said, to make managing bills easier. She'd trusted him, had wanted to believe in the partnership he described, and so she'd added his name to her accounts, had signed papers he'd read to her, had believed him when he said everything was fine. Over the past 6 months, he'd been draining those accounts, moving money into investments she couldn't track, into accounts she couldn't access, systematically stripping away every bit of financial independence she'd worked so hard to build. She hadn't realized until last week, when she'd asked a friend to help her check her balance and discovered that nearly everything was gone. When she'd confronted Marcus, he hadn't denied it. Instead, he'd turned cold, clinical, describing in careful detail exactly how trapped she was. No money, no family. Her parents had died years ago. No real friends because he'd slowly isolated her from the few she'd had, convincing her they didn't understand their relationship, that they were jealous or judgmental. He said he'd take care of me, Elena said, and Daniel could hear the bitter irony in her voice. That I should be grateful he was willing to stay with someone like me. That no one else would want me. That I was lucky he hadn't just left me on the street. But that wasn't quite what Marcus had planned. Tonight, he'd told her they were going to visit a friend upstate, someone who ran a group home for people with disabilities who needed more intensive care than they could get on their own. He described it as a beautiful place, full of light and kindness, where she could be safe and looked after. He'd made it sound like a gift, a solution to problems she didn't know she had. He'd driven her out here. She'd known from the time and the road noise that they were going far from their apartment in the city. And then he'd stopped. He'd helped her out of the car, had walked her to the bus stop, had told her to wait right there, that a bus would come to pick her up and take her the rest of the way, that he needed to go back to get some paperwork they'd forgotten, but he'd meet her there. Then he'd tied the blindfold over her eyes. So the headlights don't bother you, he'd said, and he'd left. That had been 3 hours ago. There was never a group home, Elena said, and her voice was steady now, terrifyingly steady. There was never a bus. He just wanted me gone. Vanished. Probably figured I'd die of exposure or wander onto the highway or, I don't know, something that would take care of the problem without him having to actually kill me himself. Daniel had to pull over. He couldn't keep driving, couldn't keep his hands steady on the wheel while rage and horror warred in his chest. He put the truck in park on the shoulder of the road and turned to really look at Elena for the first time. She was young, mid-20s at most, with delicate features that might have been pretty if they weren't currently slack with exhaustion and trauma. The blindfold was still tied over her eyes, dark fabric that hid whatever color they were. Her hair was starting to dry in the heat of the truck's cab, curling slightly at the ends. Her clothes were cheap but had probably been nice once, the kind of practical outfit someone wore when they thought they were going somewhere safe. She looked small, fragile, utterly defeated. And Daniel realized with a clarity that cut through everything else she had given up. She'd been sitting at that bus stop waiting not for rescue but for death, because it had seemed inevitable and maybe even easier than trying to figure out what came next. Elena, he said, and waited until she turned her head toward his voice. I need you to listen to me very carefully. What your husband did, what he's still doing, that's attempted murder. That's theft. That's about 6 different kinds of felony, and we're going to make sure he pays for every single one of them. She shook her head, a bitter smile twisting her lips. How? I can't prove anything. I can't see the account statements. I can't identify him in a lineup. I can't... You can tell the truth, Daniel interrupted, and other people can help you prove it. But right now, right this second, what you need is to get warm and dry and safe. Everything else, we'll figure it out. One step at a time, okay? Elena didn't respond for a long moment. Then so quietly, he almost missed it. Why are you helping me? It was a fair question. They were strangers. He had no obligation to her, no reason to complicate his already complicated life with someone else's nightmare. He could have driven her to a police station, handed her off to professionals, and gone home to his daughter with a clear conscience. But Daniel thought about the bus stop, about Elena sitting there alone in the rain, waiting for a death she thought was inevitable. He thought about his daughter, asleep and safe, because he'd worked himself to exhaustion to make sure she had a home and food and stability. He thought about all the times he'd felt alone and overwhelmed and certain he couldn't possibly keep going, and how he'd kept going anyway because Lily needed him to. Because someone should have stopped sooner, he said finally. Someone should have seen you and helped you long before tonight, but they didn't, so I'm stopping now. He put the truck back in drive and pulled onto the highway, and neither of them spoke again for the rest of the journey home. The house was exactly what Elena had expected when Daniel described himself as a single father and carpenter. Small, modest, held together with more effort than money. Daniel helped her out of the truck and guided her up 3 steps. She counted them automatically, and through a front door that squeaked on its hinges. Warm air enveloped her immediately, along with the scent of something that had been cooked earlier, maybe chicken soup. And underneath that, the lived-in smell of a home where people actually lived. Not the sterile, controlled environment Marcus had maintained in their apartment, where everything had to be exactly in its place and nothing could be out of order. "Mrs. Chen?" Daniel called softly. "I'm home. I brought someone with me. It's kind of a situation." Footsteps approached, and Elena heard a sharp intake of breath. "Daniel Cross, what have you gotten yourself into?" The voice was elderly, female, with the kind of no-nonsense tone that reminded Elena painfully of her grandmother. She felt Daniel shift beside her, clearly uncomfortable. "Found her at the old bus stop on Route 47. She was abandoned there by, well, it's complicated. She needs somewhere dry and warm for the night. I know it's late, and I know this isn't what you signed up for, but you couldn't leave her there," Mrs. Chen finished, and her voice had softened. "No, of course you couldn't. Come here, child." Elena felt gentle hands take hers, much smaller than Daniel's, weathered with age but steady. Mrs. Chen clucked her tongue, a sound that managed to convey both sympathy and determination. "You're frozen solid. Daniel, get her into the bathroom. Start running warm water, not hot warm. We need to bring her temperature up slowly. I'll find some dry clothes. What size are you, dear?" I don't know," Elena stammered. "Small, I think." "We'll figure it out. Go on, Daniel, and for heaven's sake, take that blindfold off her. She's not a prisoner here." Elena's hands flew to the fabric over her eyes instinctively, defensively. I can't or won't?" Mrs. Chen asked, not unkindly. "I'm blind," Elena said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. "The blindfold, it doesn't matter. I can't see anyway." A pause. Then Daniel's voice, very gentle. "Did he make you wear it?" And Elena realized she'd been so focused on the story she'd told herself that Marcus had put it on her to protect her from headlights, that it was a kindness, that she hadn't let herself think about what it really was. Control. Humiliation. One more way to make her helpless and dependent. "Yes," she whispered. "Then let's take it off," Daniel said. "You don't have to see to deserve dignity, Elena." His fingers were careful as they found the knot at the back of her head, gentle as he worked it loose. The fabric fell away and Elena felt air on her eyes for the first time in hours. She couldn't see Daniel's face, just a blur of shape and shadow, but she could hear the kindness in his voice, could feel the respect in the way he didn't touch her more than necessary. "Better?" he asked. "Yes," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. The next hour passed in a blur of sensations. Daniel guided her to a bathroom that was small but clean, started water running in a tub, and then left her alone with Mrs. Chen, who helped her out of her soaked clothes with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd raised children and wasn't fazed by much. The warm water hurt at first, her frozen skin screaming at the temperature change, but gradually the pain faded into something closer to relief. Mrs. Chen kept up a steady stream of chatter while Elena soaked, talking about Daniel and Lily, about the neighborhood, about nothing in particular. Elena understood what she was doing, providing normalcy, giving Elena something to focus on besides the nightmare of the past few hours, and was grateful for it. Eventually, Mrs. Chen helped her into dry clothes that were too big but soft and warm, sweatpants and a hoodie that smelled like laundry detergent, and something else, something masculine and clean. Daniel's clothes, Elena realized. She was wearing clothes that belonged to the man who'd stopped for her. When she emerged from the bathroom, toweling her hair as dry as she could manage, she heard voices in what she assumed was the living room, Daniel and Mrs. Chen speaking in low tones. "Can't just keep her here, Daniel. This is a police matter." "I know. And we'll call them in the morning, but right now she needs sleep and safety, not questions and procedures. And what about Lily? What do you tell her when she wakes up and finds a strange woman in your house? The truth, Daniel said simply, that sometimes people need help, and we help them when we can. You've got a good heart, Daniel Cross. I just hope it doesn't get you in trouble. Wouldn't be the first time. Elena stood in the doorway, uncertain, until Daniel seemed to sense her presence and turned. Feel better? Yes. Thank you. I don't know how to... You don't have to thank me, Daniel said. Mrs. Chen, you head home. It's late. I'll take it from here. The older woman gathered her things, but not before pressing Elena's hand one more time. You're safe now, dear. Daniel's one of the good ones. You rest, and tomorrow we'll figure everything out. Then she was gone, and Elena was alone with Daniel in his small living room, wearing his clothes, accepting his charity, and feeling more vulnerable than she'd felt even sitting at that bus stop in the rain. You can sleep in my room, Daniel said, cutting through her spiraling thoughts. I'll take the couch. It's not much, but the bed's comfortable, and I can't take your bed, Elena protested. You've already done so much. Elena, Daniel's voice was firm but not harsh. You've been through something terrible. You're exhausted, probably in shock, and definitely traumatized. I'm not having you sleep on the couch when there's a perfectly good bed available. I sleep on job sites half the time anyway. The couch is fine. She wanted to argue, but the truth was she could barely stand. The warmth and the safety and the sheer overwhelming relief of being alive and not alone had drained every last bit of energy from her body. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Daniel guided her down a short hallway, describing the layout as they went. Bathroom on the left, Lily's room on the right, his room at the end. The bed was exactly where he said it would be, and Elena sank onto it gratefully. There's water on the nightstand, Daniel said. And if you need anything at all, I'm just in the living room. Don't hesitate to call out, okay? Okay, Elena whispered. She heard him move toward the door, heard his footsteps pause. Then, Elena, you're going to be okay. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you are. I promise. She didn't answer because she couldn't, because the tears she'd been holding back were finally breaking through, and all she could do was press her face into the pillow that smelled like strangers and safety, and let herself cry for everything she'd lost and everything she'd almost lost tonight. In the living room, Daniel Cross sank onto his worn couch and stared at the ceiling, wondering what exactly he'd just brought into his home and his life, and knowing with absolute certainty that he'd do it all over again if given the choice. Outside, the rain finally began to slow, the storm moving on to trouble some other part of the state. The old bus stop on Route 47 sat empty and forgotten, water dripping from its broken roof, bearing witness to nothing but the night and the quiet miracle of someone choosing to stop when it would have been easier to keep driving. Morning came too soon, and not soon enough. Daniel woke to pale sunlight filtering through his living room curtains and the sound of small feet padding down the hallway. He'd barely slept, his mind cycling through everything Elena had told him, trying to figure out what came next, what he was supposed to do with information about attempted murder and theft and abandonment. His back protested as he sat up from the couch, reminding him that 35-year-old bodies didn't recover from uncomfortable sleeping positions the way they used to. Daddy? Lily stood in the hallway in her pajamas, the ones with the unicorns that were getting too small but that she refused to give up. Her dark hair a tangled mess around her face, her eyes still heavy with sleep. She looked at him with the kind of confused suspicion that only an 8-year-old could muster before caffeine. Why are you sleeping on the couch? Daniel ran a hand through his own hair, buying himself a moment. He'd known this conversation was coming, had rehearsed various versions of it in the handful of hours he'd managed to sleep, but none of them felt adequate now that the moment was here. Come here, sweetheart. He patted the couch beside him, and Lily shuffled over, climbing up and curling against his side with the unconscious trust of a child who'd never been given reason to doubt her father's protection. Daniel wrapped an arm around her, feeling the weight of what he was about to tell her. Last night, on my way home from work, I found someone who needed help. Lily tilted her head up to look at him. What kind of help? A woman. She was sitting at an old bus stop in the rain, and she was hurt and scared and didn't have anywhere to go. So I brought her here. Is she still here? She's sleeping in my room. Her name is Elena. Lily processed this with the serious consideration she gave to all important matters. Is she okay? She's going to be, Daniel said, hoping desperately that he was telling the truth. But she went through something really bad and she's going to need some time to feel safe again. Do you understand? Someone hurt her? Yes. On purpose? Daniel's chest tightened. He'd always tried to be honest with Lily while still protecting her from the worst of what the world could be. It was a difficult balance, made more difficult by the fact that she was too smart for her own good and could smell a lie from a mile away. Yes, baby, on purpose. Lily was quiet for a long moment, and Daniel could practically see the thoughts arranging themselves in her mind. Then, is she going to stay here? Just for a little while, until we can figure out how to help her. Is that okay with you? Another pause. Then Lily nodded against his chest. Mrs. Chen says we're supposed to help people when they need it. She says that's what makes us human instead of just animals taking up space. Daniel felt a rush of affection for his neighbor, who'd apparently been teaching his daughter philosophy during their evenings together. Mrs. Chen is a wise woman. Is the lady scared of you? The question caught him off guard. What makes you ask that? You said she's hurt and scared. When I got scared of the dark last year, I was scared of everything for a while. Even you, a little bit. Not because you were scary, but because everything felt scary. Daniel held his daughter a little tighter, marveling at the way children could sometimes see straight to the heart of things that adults spent years trying to understand. You're right, she probably is scared of me, at least a little. So we need to be patient and gentle and give her space when she needs it. Can you do that? I'm very good at being gentle, Lily said with the utmost seriousness. Remember when we found that bird with the broken wing? I was so gentle that it stopped trying to fly away. I remember. You were very brave and very kind. They sat together in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sunlight strengthen across the worn carpet of their living room. Daniel could hear the old house settling around them, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of Mrs. Chen's television through the wall. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Daddy? Yeah, sweetheart? Are you going to fix her like you fix broken things? Daniel felt something crack in his chest at the simplicity of the question, at the faith it implied in his ability to make things right. I'm going to try, Lily. But people aren't like broken furniture. Sometimes they have to fix themselves, and we just help hold the pieces together while they do. Lily considered this. Like glue? Yeah, baby, like glue. The sound of a door opening down the hallway made them both turn. Elena emerged slowly, one hand trailing along the wall to orient herself, wearing Daniel's two large sweatpants and hoodie, her hair still damp and curling at the ends. She moved with the careful precision of someone navigating unfamiliar territory, her face turned slightly toward the sound of their voices. I'm sorry, she said immediately. I didn't mean to sleep so late. I'll get out of your way. You're not in the way, Daniel said, getting up from the couch. And there's nowhere you need to be right now except here. Are you hungry? Elena opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Daniel recognized the expression, the visible struggle of someone who'd been trained to minimize their needs and was now being asked to acknowledge them. I don't want to be any trouble. That's not what I asked. Daniel kept his voice gentle but firm. Are you hungry? Yes. Then let's fix that. Lily, want to help me make breakfast? His daughter scrambled off the couch with the enthusiasm of a child being offered a concrete task. Can we make pancakes? We can make pancakes. Daniel turned back to Elena, who was still standing in the hallway entrance looking lost and uncertain. Come sit down. You don't have to do anything except rest and eat. That's all that's required of you right now. Elena moved forward slowly, and Daniel watched Lily's eyes go wide as she noticed something he'd forgotten to mention. Are you blind? His daughter asked, with the blunt curiosity of children who hadn't yet learned that some questions were supposed to be asked more delicately. Lily, Daniel started, but Elena interrupted. It's okay. Yes, I'm blind. I have been my whole life. Does it hurt? No, it's just different. I see differently than you do. Lily processed this with her characteristic gravity. Do you need help sitting down? That would be nice. Thank you. Daniel watched his 8-year-old daughter take Elena's hand with careful gentleness and guide her to one of the chairs at their small kitchen table, explaining the layout as she went with the matter-of-fact helpfulness of someone who'd been raised to think of others. His chest felt tight with pride and fear in equal measure, pride in the person Lily was becoming, fear that by bringing Elena into their home, he might be exposing his daughter to complications and dangers he couldn't fully anticipate. But when Lily climbed into the chair next to Elena and started chattering about her science project and her teacher and the book she was reading, and when Elena's face softened into something that might almost be a smile, Daniel thought maybe it was worth the risk. He moved to the kitchen and started pulling out ingredients for pancakes, falling into the familiar rhythm of weekend morning cooking. Lily kept up her steady stream of conversation, and Daniel noticed that Elena was beginning to relax fractionally, her shoulders dropping from their defensive position around her ears, her hands unclenching where they rested on the table. "What kind of pancakes do you like?" Lily asked. "I don't remember the last time I had pancakes," Elena said quietly. "You don't remember? How can you not remember pancakes? We have them every Saturday when Daddy doesn't have to work. Sometimes he puts chocolate chips in them, but only if I've been really good during the week." "Have you been really good this week?" Elena asked, and Daniel caught the slight warmth in her voice, the first hint that somewhere under the trauma and exhaustion was a person who could still engage with simple moments. "Mostly," Lily said with endearing honesty. "I got in trouble for talking during math class on Tuesday, but Mrs. Patterson said it was only a little trouble, not big trouble." "What's the difference?" "Little trouble is when you get a warning. Big trouble is when you have to miss recess or call your parents. I've never had big trouble. Daddy would be sad." Daniel cleared his throat. "Daddy would understand that everyone makes mistakes sometimes. But yes, I'd be disappointed if you were disrespectful to your teachers." He mixed the batter while listening to Lily explain the complicated social hierarchies of third-grade classroom politics, marveling at how his daughter had somehow managed to put Elena at ease in a way he couldn't have. There was something about Lily's uncomplicated acceptance, her complete lack of pity or awkwardness, that seemed to allow Elena to simply exist without the weight of her circumstances pressing down on her every second. The pancakes came out slightly uneven. Daniel's mind was elsewhere, but nobody seemed to care. He set plates in front of Elena and Lily, then guided Elena's hand to her fork and knife, describing the layout of her plate in the simple, straightforward way he'd seen people do in movies but had never actually done himself. She nodded her thanks and started eating slowly, carefully, and Daniel pretended not to notice the way her hands still shook slightly. They were halfway through breakfast when someone knocked on the front door. The sound seemed to shatter the fragile peace that had settled over the kitchen. Elena's fork clattered to her plate, her whole body going rigid with fear. Lily looked up with mild curiosity, used to neighbors stopping by, but Daniel felt his own tension ratchet up several notches. "Stay here," he said quietly, getting up from the table. "It's probably just Mrs. Chen." But it wasn't Mrs. Chen. Through the front door's small window, Daniel could see a man in his late 30s wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in this neighborhood. His hair perfectly styled, his face arranged in an expression of concerned confusion. Everything about him screamed money and control and carefully cultivated image. Daniel opened the door, but didn't step back to let the man enter. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for my wife," the man said, and his voice was smooth, practiced, designed to convey reasonableness and charm. "Elena Moore? I was told she might be here." "There's been a terrible misunderstanding." "Who told you she was here?" Daniel interrupted, his voice flat. The man's smile faltered slightly. "I called the police this morning to report her missing. They said someone called last night from this address saying they'd found a woman matching her description. I came as soon as I heard. May I come in? I need to see that she's all right." Every instinct in Daniel's body was screaming that this was wrong, that letting this man, Marcus, it had to be Marcus, anywhere near Elena would be a betrayal of the trust she'd placed in him last night. But he also wasn't sure what his legal standing was here, what rights he had to refuse a husband access to his wife. "Wait here," Daniel said, and closed the door before Marcus could respond. He returned to the kitchen to find Elena standing, her face drained of all color, one hand gripping the back of her chair so hard her knuckles were white. Lily had moved closer to her, looking between the adults with worried eyes. "It's him," Elena whispered. "Isn't it?" "Says he's your husband. Says the police told him you were here." Daniel kept his voice low, calm, even though his heart was hammering in his chest. "Says there's been a misunderstanding and he wants to see you're all right." A sound escaped Elena that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so broken. "A misunderstanding. He left me to die, and now it's a misunderstanding." "You don't have to see him. You don't have to talk to him. But I need to know, do you want to press charges? Do you want to tell the police what really happened?" Elena's breathing had gone shallow and rapid, and Daniel recognized the signs of a panic attack building. He moved closer, keeping his movements slow and visible, even though she couldn't see them. "Elena, look at me. Or listen to me. You're safe. He can't get to you without going through me, and I promise you that's not going to happen, but I need to know what you want to do here." "I want him gone," she said, and there was steel underneath the fear now, something hard and determined fighting its way through the trauma. "I want him arrested. I want him to pay for what he did." "Then that's what we'll do. But I'm going to need you to be strong for a little bit longer. Can you do that?" Elena straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and nodded. "Yes." Daniel turned to Lily. "Sweetheart, I need you to take Elena to your room and stay there with her. Keep the door locked. Don't open it for anyone except me, understand?" "Is the man at the door bad?" Lily asked. "Yes, baby, he's bad." "Then I'll protect Elena." Lily took Elena's hand with the fierce determination of a child who'd been given an important job. "Come on, I have books I can read to you." Daniel watched them disappear down the hallway, waited until he heard Lily's bedroom door close and lock, and then pulled out his phone. He dialed 911, and when the operator answered, he spoke clearly and deliberately. "I need police at 247 Oak Street. I have a woman here who was abandoned by her husband last night in an attempt to kill her. He's just shown up at my door claiming there's been a misunderstanding. I need officers here now before the situation escalates." The operator's voice sharpened with attention. "Is anyone in immediate danger?" "Not yet. But the woman is terrified, and the husband is at my front door. I'm not letting him in, but I don't know how long he'll stay calm." "Officers are on their way. Stay on the line with me. Do you have somewhere safe you can wait?" "I'm staying between him and her. That's as safe as it's going to get." Daniel ended the call despite the operator's protests and returned to the front door. Marcus was still standing on the porch, but his expression had shifted from concerned confusion to something harder, more calculating. "I know she's in there," Marcus said when Daniel opened the door. "Whatever she told you, it's not true. My wife has issues, mental health problems. She gets confused, tells stories that aren't real. I've been trying to get her help, but she refuses treatment." "Is that why you left her blindfolded at an abandoned bus stop in the middle of nowhere?" Daniel asked conversationally. Marcus's face went very still. "I don't know what she told you, but you told her there was a group home. You told her a bus was coming. You tied a blindfold over her eyes and left her there to die. That's not—" "She's confused. The police are on their way," Daniel said. "If I were you, I'd start thinking about a lawyer instead of a story." Something flickered across Marcus's face then. Rage, quickly controlled but visible for just a moment. This was a man who was used to being in control, to having his explanations accepted, to being believed over anyone who contradicted him. The mask of concerned husband was slipping, revealing something uglier underneath. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Marcus said, his voice dropping into something colder. "Elena is my wife. Legally, she's my responsibility. Whatever arrangement you think you have here, it's not legal. You're harboring someone else's spouse without permission. That's custodial interference at minimum. She's not a child. She's an adult who doesn't want to see you. She's disabled and vulnerable. She needs supervision. She needs care. You think you're helping her, but you're just making things worse." Daniel felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. The only thing that made things worse was you stealing her money and trying to murder her. "I never touched her," Marcus said, and his voice was smooth again, reasonable. I drove her to what I thought was a therapeutic facility. If she wandered off and got confused, that's unfortunate, but it's hardly attempted murder. It's evidence that she needs more help than I can provide at home." The sheer audacity of the lie, delivered with such casual confidence, made Daniel's blood boil. This was a man who'd spent years gaslighting his blind wife, who'd isolated and manipulated and stolen from her, and who now stood on Daniel's porch spinning a narrative where he was the concerned caregiver and Elena was the confused, unreliable victim. "You're going to want to step back now," Daniel said quietly. "Or what? You'll hit me? Go ahead. Give me a reason to have you arrested for assault." The sound of sirens in the distance had never been so welcome. Daniel watched Marcus's expression shift as he recognized the sound, watched him recalculate whatever strategy he'd been employing. By the time 2 patrol cars pulled up to the curb, Marcus had rearranged his face back into concerned confusion. 2 officers got out, a man and a woman, both with the wary alertness of people responding to a domestic situation. The female officer approached the porch, while her partner hung back slightly, hand resting casually near his weapon. "I'm Officer Reyes. We got a call about a disturbance." "My wife is inside," Marcus said immediately, before Daniel could speak. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. She has mental health issues, and this man has been keeping her from me." "That's not accurate," Daniel interrupted. "My name is Daniel Cross. Last night around 11 p.m., I found a woman named Elena Moore abandoned at the old bus stop on Route 47. She was blindfolded, soaking wet, and had been left there by her husband, this man, who told her to wait for a bus that was never coming. I brought her here, gave her shelter, and called you this morning to report what she told me. Then he showed up." Officer Reyes looked between them, her expression carefully neutral. "And where is Mrs. Moore now?" "Inside. In my daughter's room. She's terrified of him and doesn't want to see him." "She's not in her right mind," Marcus said smoothly. "She gets these episodes where she becomes paranoid and confused. I was trying to get her professional help when she ran off. I've been worried sick." "Then you won't mind if we talk to her separately," Officer Reyes said. It wasn't a question. She looked at Daniel. "Mr. Cross, can we come inside?" Daniel stepped back, allowing both officers to enter. Marcus tried to follow, but Officer Reyes held up a hand. "Sir, please wait outside while we sort this out. She's my wife, and this is his home, and right now we're trying to establish what actually happened. Please wait on the porch." The look Marcus gave Daniel as he was excluded was pure venom. All pretense dropped. Daniel met his eyes steadily, refusing to be intimidated, and after a moment Marcus turned away, pulling out his phone with jerky, angry movements. Inside, Daniel led the officers down the hallway and knocked gently on Lily's door. "Lily, it's Dad. The police are here. Can you open the door?" He heard the lock click, and then Lily's face appeared in the crack, her eyes wide and worried. Behind her, Elena sat on Lily's bed, her arms wrapped around herself, looking smaller and more fragile than she had even last night in the rain. Officer Reyes crouched down to Lily's eye level. "Hi there. What's your name?" "Lily Cross." "Are you going to arrest the bad man?" "We're going to figure out what happened. Can I talk to the lady in there with you?" Lily looked back at Elena, then at her father, seeking permission. Daniel nodded, and Lily stepped back to let the officers in. The male officer, his nameplate read Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, stayed in the doorway while Officer Reyes moved slowly into the room. "Mrs. Moore? I'm Officer Reyes. Can we talk for a few minutes?" Elena's head turned toward the voice, and Daniel could see her gathering herself, pulling together whatever reserves of strength she had left. "Yes. Your husband says you have mental health issues and that you became confused last night. Is that true?" "No." Elena's voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Marcus left me at an abandoned bus stop. He told me a bus was coming to take me to a care facility. He blindfolded me and left me there. There was no bus. There was no facility. He wanted me gone." "Why would he want that?" "Because he's been stealing from me. He's drained my bank accounts, money I inherited, money from my disability payments, money from my business. I confronted him about it last week, and this was his solution." Officer Reyes glanced at her partner, something passing between them. Do you have any proof of the theft? I have bank statements I can request. I have friends who can verify what my accounts looked like before I married him. I have... Elena's voice broke slightly. I have 3 years of trusting someone who was planning to kill me. Does that count as proof? We'll need to verify your claims about the accounts, Officer Reyes said gently. But right now, I need to know, do you feel safe going home with your husband? No. The word came out flat, absolute. If I go back with him, I won't survive. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually I'll disappear. Please don't make me go back. Daniel spoke up from the doorway. She can stay here as long as she needs to. Officer Reyes looked at him with something that might have been approval or might have been concern. Mr. Cross, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this is a complicated situation. Mrs. Moore is married. Legally, that gives her husband certain rights. He gave up those rights when he tried to kill her, Daniel said. That's for a court to determine. Right now, all we have is 2 conflicting stories. Then investigate, Elena said, and there was desperation in her voice now. Check the bus schedules. There hasn't been service to that stop in years. Marcus would have known that. Check his phone records. Check where his car was last night. Check my accounts and see where the money went. I'm not crazy, and I'm not confused. I'm telling you the truth. Officer Chen spoke for the first time. The bus stop on Route 47, that's the one near the old Henderson farm? Yes, Daniel confirmed. Nobody goes out there. It's been abandoned for over a decade. There's no reason anyone would be there at night unless they were dumped there. Officer Reyes nodded slowly. All right, here's what's going to happen. Mrs. Moore, I believe you deserve a chance to prove your claims. We're going to take statements from everyone. We're going to start looking into your financial records, and we're going to verify your husband's story about this care facility. In the meantime, you can stay here if Mr. Cross is willing to provide accommodation. I am, Daniel said immediately. But, Officer Reyes continued, we're going to need you to come to the station and file a formal report. We need everything documented, when and where you were abandoned, what your husband told you, what condition you were in when Mr. Cross found you. Can you do that? Elena took a shaky breath. Yes? Good. Let me go talk to your husband, and then we'll get you down to the station. Officer Reyes stood, gave Lily a kind smile, and headed back toward the front door with Officer Chen. Daniel stayed with Elena and Lily, listening to the muffled voices from the living room, unable to make out specific words, but hearing the tone shift from Marcus's smooth charm to something angrier, more defensive. After several minutes, the front door opened and closed, and Daniel heard a car engine start and pull away. Officer Reyes returned alone. Mr. Moore has agreed to go to the station separately to give his statement. I've advised him not to contact his wife directly until this is sorted out. That doesn't have legal weight yet, but it's on record now. What happens next? Daniel asked. Next, we investigate. Mrs. Moore comes to the station and files her report. We pull financial records, phone records, verify the timeline. If her story holds up, and between you and me, it's already looking like it will, we'll have enough for an arrest warrant on multiple charges. She looked at Elena. Are you ready to do this? Elena nodded, then seemed to realize the officer might not have seen it. Yes, I'm ready. Good. Let me get you a victim advocate to meet us at the station, someone who specializes in disability rights. You're not going to be alone in this. The next few hours passed in a blur of statements and documentation and the slow, grinding machinery of justice beginning to turn. Daniel drove Elena to the police station, with Lily in the back seat insisting she needed to come along for moral support. The victim advocate turned out to be a woman named Sarah Chen, actual relation to Officer Chen, his younger sister, who had worked with blind crime victims before and knew exactly how to help Elena navigate a system that wasn't designed for people who couldn't see forms or read body language. Daniel gave his own statement, describing in detail what he'd found last night, what Elena had told him, what Marcus had said this morning. He provided the exact time and location, described Elena's physical condition, confirmed that she'd been wearing a blindfold and was soaking wet and nearly hypothermic. Through the glass window of the interview room, he watched Elena give her own statement, watched her hands shake as she spoke, watched Sarah reach over to squeeze her shoulder at the hardest moments. He felt a fierce protective anger building in his chest, not just at Marcus, but at whatever system had failed to protect Elena before it got to this point, whatever series of small abandonments had led to the big one last night. By the time they finally left the station, it was late afternoon. Elena looked exhausted, wrung out, barely able to keep herself upright. Lily had fallen asleep in one of the waiting room chairs, her small face peaceful despite the chaos of the day. "They're going to arrest him," Elena said quietly as Daniel guided her back to his truck. Sarah said they have enough for a warrant. Financial fraud, attempted murder, custodial interference, something about leaving a vulnerable person in danger. "Good," Daniel said, and meant it. "I don't have anywhere to go after this. No apartment. It was his, in his name. No money until they sort out the accounts. No job right now because I haven't been able to work in months because Marcus said I was too stressed and needed to rest." Her voice cracked. "I have nothing." Daniel helped her into the truck, then climbed in himself and just sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, trying to figure out how to say what he needed to say without sounding like he was trying to be a savior or a hero. "You have somewhere to go," he said finally. "My house isn't much, but it's safe and it's warm, and you're welcome to stay as long as you need. No strings, no expectations, just a place to figure out what comes next." Elena turned her face toward him, and even though she couldn't see him, he felt the weight of her gaze. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. I'm just someone you found on the side of the road." "You're not just anything," Daniel said. "You're someone who survived something terrible and is still here, still fighting. That deserves support. That deserves someone standing with you instead of walking away." "But why you?" Daniel thought about that, about all the easy answers he could give. Because it was the right thing to do, because anyone would have done the same, because he couldn't live with himself if he'd driven past. But the truth was more complicated than that. "My wife died when Lily was 2, he said quietly. "Car accident, drunk driver. One minute I had a family and a future, and the next minute I was a single father with a toddler and no idea how to do any of it. I almost didn't make it through that first year. I was drowning, and I kept thinking someone should notice, someone should help, someone should see that I was falling apart." He paused, remembering those dark months, the weight of grief and responsibility that had nearly crushed him. But nobody did. Or maybe they did notice and just didn't know what to do, or didn't think it was their place to interfere. "I figured it out eventually, pulled myself together for Lily's sake, but I never forgot what it felt like to be that alone. So when I saw you last night, when I saw someone who needed help and had no one, I couldn't be the person who drove past. I couldn't be another person who noticed and did nothing." The silence in the truck was heavy with shared understanding, with the recognition of pain that transforms into purpose. Finally, Elena spoke. "Thank you for stopping, for all of this. You don't have to thank me. Just rest, heal, figure out who you are when you're not just trying to survive. That's enough." Daniel started the truck and pulled out of the police station parking lot, carrying his sleeping daughter and a woman who was slowly learning that safety could exist outside of nightmares, heading back to a house that was too small and too worn, but that, for now, meant home. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. The arrest happened 3 days later, early on a Thursday morning, while Daniel was helping Lily get ready for school, and Elena sat at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug in small, repetitive circles that spoke of anxiety she couldn't quite voice. Sarah Chen called with the news, her voice professionally neutral, but with an undercurrent of satisfaction. They'd executed the warrant at Marcus Moore's apartment an hour ago. He'd been taken into custody without incident, though he'd immediately lawyered up and refused to answer questions. The financial records had been damning: transfers to offshore accounts, forged signatures on loan documents, a systematic draining of Elena's inheritance that had been going on for nearly 2 years. Combined with Daniel's testimony, the physical evidence of the abandoned bus stop, and cell phone data that placed Marcus's car at that exact location the night Elena had been left there, the district attorney was confident they had a solid case. "What does that mean?" Elena asked when Daniel relayed the information. Her hands had stilled on the mug, her whole body gone tense with something between hope and terror. It means he's being charged, officially, with multiple felonies. Daniel set a plate of toast in front of her, guiding her hand to it. Financial fraud, attempted murder, exploitation of a vulnerable person. Sarah says we're looking at a trial in a few months, unless he takes a plea deal. Will I have to testify? Probably. Sarah will help you prepare. But Elena... Daniel waited until she turned her face toward his voice. You don't have to be afraid of him anymore. He's in custody. He can't get to you. He got to me before, she said quietly, for 3 years, and I never saw it coming. The double meaning of her words hung in the air between them. Lily, who'd been unusually quiet through breakfast, suddenly spoke up. My teacher says that bad people are good at pretending to be nice. She says that's what makes them bad, not that they're mean all the time, but that they trick you into trusting them and then hurt you when you're not looking. Elena's face softened slightly. Your teacher sounds very wise. She is. She also says that being tricked doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. Everyone gets tricked sometimes. Daniel felt a surge of gratitude for Mrs. Patterson and her apparently profound understanding of human nature as filtered through 8-year-old comprehension. He watched some of the tension leave Elena's shoulders, watched her take a small bite of toast as if Lily's words had given her permission to believe she wasn't fundamentally broken for having trusted the wrong person. The days that followed settled into a strange new rhythm. Daniel went to work each morning, leaving Elena in Mrs. Chen's capable care. The older woman had taken to the situation with the pragmatic efficiency of someone who'd seen enough of life to know that sometimes people needed help and sometimes you were the one positioned to give it. She'd show up each morning with containers of soup or casserole, would sit with Elena and teach her the layout of Daniel's house through repetition and patience, would be there when Lily got home from school to help with homework while Elena listened quietly from the couch. But it was Lily who seemed to understand instinctively what Elena needed most. She'd come home each afternoon, dump her backpack by the door, and immediately launch into detailed descriptions of her day, the drama of who sat with whom at lunch, the injustice of a pop quiz in spelling, the fascinating facts she'd learned about the solar system. She'd pull Elena into her orbit with the casual expectation that, of course, this interesting person would want to hear about third-grade politics. And somehow, impossibly, Elena would find herself drawn out of the gray fog of trauma and into the bright, uncomplicated world of childhood concerns. Do you want to feel my science project? Lily asked one afternoon, about a week after the arrest. It's the solar system. I made it out of styrofoam balls and paint, and each planet is a different texture so you can tell them apart. Elena hesitated, then nodded. Lily guided her hands to the display board, describing each planet as Elena's fingers explored the surfaces. Jupiter had been coated in rough sandpaper. Saturn's rings were made of corrugated cardboard. Mars was covered in tiny beads that felt like sand. Earth was smooth and cool, painted with the careful attention of a child who understood that some things deserved to be treated with respect. This is beautiful, Elena said, and her voice carried genuine wonder. You can feel the thought you put into it. Dad says that making things with your hands helps you understand them better. That's why he likes being a carpenter, because you can touch what you build and know it's real. Your dad is right about a lot of things. I know, Lily said, with the absolute confidence of a child who'd never had reason to doubt her father. He's the best dad in the world. Even when he's tired and his back hurts, he still helps me with homework and makes me pancakes and tucks me in at night. Daniel, working at the kitchen table on a set of cabinet plans, felt his throat tighten. He didn't feel like the best dad in the world. He felt like someone barely keeping all the pieces together, hoping the glue would hold long enough to get Lily raised and launched into whatever life she'd build for herself. But hearing his daughter's unwavering faith in him, seeing the way Elena's expression shifted to something softer and more complicated, it made him think maybe he was doing something right after all. That night, after Lily was asleep, Elena found her way to the kitchen where Daniel sat with a beer and a stack of bills he'd been avoiding. She moved carefully, one hand trailing the wall, and Daniel realized she'd memorized the layout already. 10 days in his house, and she navigated it like she'd lived there for months. Can I ask you something? She said, hovering in the doorway. Of course. Want to sit? She made her way to the chair across from him, settling into it with the precise movements of someone who'd learned to trust her spatial memory. For a long moment, she didn't speak, and Daniel waited, giving her the space to organize whatever thoughts she was struggling with. "Why haven't you asked me about the money?" she finally said. Daniel frowned, not following. "What money?" "The inheritance Marcus stole. Sarah says they've frozen all his accounts, that they're working on recovering what he took. Once the trial's over, assuming we win, I'll get most of it back. Maybe all of it, depending on what he's already spent." She paused, her fingers knotting together on the table. "It's a lot of money, more than someone like me should probably have. And you haven't asked me about it once." "Why would I ask you about it?" "Because that's what people do. They find out you have money, and suddenly they're interested in being your friend, in helping you, in making sure you're okay." Her voice carried a bitterness that spoke of hard lessons learned. Marcus wasn't the first. He was just the one who got closest. Daniel set down his beer, studying her face in the dim kitchen light. "Elena, I didn't stop for you because I thought you had money. I stopped because you were a human being who needed help. What you have or don't have in a bank account has exactly nothing to do with why you're welcome in this house." "But I'm a burden. I know I am. I can't work right now. I can't contribute to rent or groceries. I can't even watch Lily because I can't see if she's getting into trouble. I'm just taking. And when people realize they're giving and getting nothing back..." "Stop." Daniel's voice was firm enough to cut through her spiral. "You're not a burden. You're a person who's recovering from trauma. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. A burden is something dead that you carry. You're alive. You're healing. And that takes time and space and patience, and none of those things are wasted just because you can't measure immediate return on investment." Elena was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more vulnerable. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Accept help. Accept kindness. Accept that maybe someone wants me here not because of what I can give them, but just because..." She broke off, shaking her head. "I don't know how to believe that's real." Daniel thought about his own journey after his wife died, about how long it had taken him to accept that the casseroles neighbors brought and the offers to watch Lily weren't transactions, but simply people being decent to someone who was drowning. He thought about how alone he'd felt, even surrounded by kindness, because accepting help meant acknowledging you couldn't do everything yourself, and that felt like failure. "I don't have a good answer for you," he said honestly. "Except that maybe you don't have to believe it's real right now. Maybe you just have to accept that it's happening, and trust that if it was a trick, you'd have seen signs of it by now." "I can't see signs of anything," Elena said, and there was dark humor in her voice. "You know what I mean? You're smart. You're observant in ways that don't require eyes. If I was running some kind of con on you, you'd have sensed something off by now." Elena considered this, her head tilted slightly as if she was listening to something beyond his words. "You're different when you're with Lily." The observation caught Daniel off guard. "Different how?" "Softer, more patient. You slow down when you talk to her, like you're making sure every word is chosen carefully. But with me, you're more direct, almost blunt sometimes." "Is that a problem?" "No, it's good. Marcus used to talk to me like I was a child, slow and patronizing, like I couldn't understand complex things because I couldn't see. You talk to me like I'm an adult who happens to be blind. There's a difference." "You are an adult who happens to be blind," Daniel said. "That's not the most interesting thing about you. It's just a fact, like Lily being 8 or me being a carpenter." "What is the most interesting thing about me?" The question came out tentative, almost shy. Daniel thought about it, really thought about it. "You're a survivor, not in the way people usually mean it, like you just endured something passively, but you survived actively. You sat in that bus stop and you were terrified and you thought you were going to die, but when I showed up, you still found the courage to get in a stranger's truck. You could have refused. You could have stayed there out of fear. But you chose to take a chance on the possibility that someone might actually help you. That takes guts. Or desperation. Sometimes those are the same thing. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you can't do it alone and ask for help." Elena's fingers had stilled on the table, and Daniel could see her processing his words, turning them over, testing them against whatever internal narrative she'd built about herself. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. Sarah says the trial will probably happen in 3 or 4 months. She says I should start thinking about what comes after, where I'll live, how I'll work, what my life looks like when this is all over. What do you want it to look like? I don't know. I used to make jewelry. Did I tell you that? You mentioned it the first night, jewelry design. I was good at it, really good. I worked by touch, by feel, textures and weights, and the way different materials fit together. People used to tell me my pieces were unique, that they had this quality that mass-produced jewelry didn't have. She paused, something like longing in her voice. Marcus said it was a waste of time, that I should focus on managing my disability, on learning to be more independent in practical ways. He made it sound like art was a luxury I couldn't afford. Sounds like Marcus was an idiot. A ghost of a smile touched Elena's lips. Yes, he was. So why not start again? Making jewelry? I don't have any of my tools. They were all in the apartment, Marcus's apartment. I don't have materials. I don't have a workspace. You don't have those things right now, Daniel interrupted. But that doesn't mean you can't get them. Once the financial stuff is sorted out, once you have access to your accounts again, you can rebuild. Start over. I wouldn't even know where to begin. You begin with one piece, then another, then another. That's how you build anything, one small piece at a time, until suddenly you look up and realize you've made something whole. Elena was quiet for a long moment, and Daniel could see her turning the idea over in her mind, testing it against her fear and her uncertainty. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a fragile hope that hadn't been there before. Would you help me if I decided to try? Of course. Whatever you need. I don't even know what I need yet. Well, then we'll figure it out together, one step at a time. The conversation shifted after that, moving into easier territory. Lily's upcoming field trip, the kitchen cabinet job Daniel was trying to finish, the book Mrs. Chen had been reading to Elena in the afternoons. But something had changed in Elena's demeanor, some subtle shift from passive survival to active consideration of a future that extended beyond just getting through each day. 2 weeks later, Sarah Chen showed up at the house with a banker's box full of files and a tablet computer loaded with specialized software. She set everything on the kitchen table while Elena sat across from her, her fingers already moving restlessly, anticipating what was coming. The court has released your funds, Sarah said without preamble. All of your original accounts have been restored, plus damages Marcus had already spent that we were able to recover from his assets. The apartment was in his name, so that's his problem now. But everything else, your inheritance, your disability payments, your business accounts, it's all yours again. Elena's hands had gone very still. How much? Sarah told her, and Daniel watched the color drain from Elena's face. It was more than he'd expected, not enough to retire on, but enough to build a real life, to invest in a business, to have security and options. Enough that Elena wouldn't have to depend on anyone ever again if she didn't want to. The trial date is set for 8 weeks from now, Sarah continued. The DA is feeling confident. Marcus's lawyer has been making noises about a plea deal, but the DA wants to push for the maximum sentence. What happened to you? It's going to send a message that you can't exploit vulnerable people and walk away. I'm not vulnerable, Elena said quietly, but there was no heat in it, just a kind of tired resignation. You were made vulnerable, Sarah corrected gently, by someone who was supposed to protect you. There's a difference, and the law recognizes that difference. She paused, then reached across the table to touch Elena's hand. You're going to have to testify, to face him in court. Are you ready for that? Elena took a shaky breath. I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but I'll do it anyway. That's all anyone can ask. After Sarah left, Elena sat at the table for a long time, not moving, barely breathing. Daniel gave her space, busying himself with dinner preparations while keeping one eye on her, ready to intervene if she needed him. Finally, she spoke. I could leave now. Get my own place. Stop imposing on you and Lily. You could, Daniel agreed carefully. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want. A month ago, I thought I wanted to die. 2 weeks ago, I thought I just wanted to survive. Now I have money and options and the possibility of a future, and I don't know what to do with any of it. Daniel set down the knife he'd been using to chop vegetables and moved to sit across from her. Then don't decide right now. Stay here while you figure it out. Stay through the trial at least. You're going to need support, and Lily would be devastated if you left. What about you? Would you be devastated? The question was asked lightly, almost teasingly, but Daniel heard the real vulnerability underneath it. He thought about the past few weeks, about how the house had felt different with Elena in it, fuller somehow, less empty despite still being too small and too worn. He thought about the sound of her voice in the evenings, the way Lily lit up when Elena asked about her day, the quiet companionship of shared meals and comfortable silence. Yeah, he said honestly, I would be. You've become part of things here, part of the routine, part of... He paused, trying to find the right words. You make this house feel more like a home, and I'd miss that if you left. Elena's face did something complicated, emotions flickering too fast for Daniel to track. When she spoke, her voice was thick with unshed tears. No one's ever said anything like that to me before. Not like they meant it. I mean it. I know. That's what makes it so hard to believe. Lily chose that moment to burst through the front door, home from school with her usual enthusiasm and a painting she'd made in art class that she insisted Elena needed to feel immediately. The heavy moment broke, and Daniel let it go, watching his daughter guide Elena's fingers over the textured paint, describing the colors and shapes with the unselfconscious confidence of someone who'd never considered that blindness might be a barrier to experiencing art. That night, after Lily was asleep, Elena made a decision. She found Daniel in the garage where he was sanding a piece of oak for a client's bookshelf, and she waited until he noticed her presence and turned off the sander. I want to start working again, she said, making jewelry, but I don't know how to begin or what I need or where to even find materials. And I thought, if you were serious about helping, maybe you could help me figure that out. Daniel wiped sawdust from his hands and smiled. I was serious. And I know a few places that sell craft supplies. One of them specializes in metalworking. We could go tomorrow afternoon after I pick up Lily from school. Make it a field trip. You'd take time off work for that? Elena, I take time off work for Lily's school plays and parent-teacher conferences and doctor's appointments. This isn't different. You matter too. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and Daniel went back to his sanding while Elena stood in the doorway, listening to the rhythmic rasp of wood against sandpaper, feeling something like hope beginning to take root in the devastated landscape of her heart. The craft supply store was overwhelming in the best possible way. Elena stood in the metalworking section, her fingers exploring different gauges of wire, different weights of chain, different textures of beads and findings. The store clerk, a middle-aged woman named Dorothy, who'd been working there for 20 years, took one look at Elena's careful, tactile exploration and immediately understood what she needed. You work by feel, Dorothy said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I used to make jewelry before, Elena paused, not sure how to explain the past 3 years in a way that made sense. Before I stopped. I'm trying to start again. What kind of pieces did you make? Necklaces, mostly. Intricate ones with multiple layers. I liked the weight of things, the way different materials felt against each other. I'd design them without seeing them, and then people would tell me they were beautiful, and I'd have to trust that beauty existed in what I couldn't see. Dorothy was quiet for a moment, and Elena could feel her being assessed, considered. Then Dorothy took her hand and placed it on a spool of wire that felt different from all the others, heavier, cooler, with a texture that suggested quality. Sterling silver, 20 gauge. It's what you want for structural pieces that need to hold weight. This over here, she guided Elena's hand to another spool, is copper, warmer, more forgiving, good for learning and practicing. And these, Elena's fingers found a container of small objects that clicked softly against each other, are genuine semi-precious stones, tumbled smooth. Each one is different if you pay attention to the weight and density. For the next hour, Dorothy guided Elena through the store, describing materials not by how they looked, but by how they felt, how they behaved, what possibilities they held. Lily trailed behind them, occasionally picking up something shiny and asking if Elena wanted to feel it, while Daniel pushed a cart that slowly filled with wire and tools and findings and small containers of beads and stones. "I can't afford all this," Elena said at one point, overwhelmed by the growing pile. "Yes, you can," Daniel reminded her gently. "Your accounts are restored, remember? And this is an investment in your future, in your art." "But it's so much Elena," Dorothy's voice was firm. "A carpenter needs tools. A painter needs canvas and paint. An artist who works by touch needs materials to touch. This isn't extravagant. This is what you need to do the work you're meant to do." By the time they left the store, the truck bed was loaded with supplies, and Elena's face showed a mixture of excitement and terror. She sat in the passenger seat with a small box on her lap, her fingers already exploring the contents, a collection of stones Dorothy had insisted she take as a starter set. "I don't know if I remember how," she said quietly as Daniel drove them home. "You'll remember," Lily said from the back seat with absolute confidence. "It's like riding a bike. You don't forget how to make beautiful things." "I've never ridden a bike." "Well, then it's like making pancakes. Even if you haven't done it in a while, your hands remember what to do." Elena laughed, and it was the first genuine laugh Daniel had heard from her since that first night. The sound of it filled the truck cab, bright and unexpected, and Daniel found himself smiling despite the long day and the money they'd just spent and all the uncertainty that still lay ahead. That evening, Daniel cleared space in the corner of the living room and set up a card table as a temporary workspace. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. A flat surface with good light and enough room for Elena to spread out materials and organize them by touch. He described the layout to her carefully, helping her create a mental map of where everything was. And then he left her alone to explore, to remember, to begin. An hour later, he checked on her and found her sitting motionless, a piece of wire in her hands, tears running silently down her face. "Elena? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." She wiped at her face impatiently. I'd forgotten what this felt like. Having something to make. Having a purpose beyond just surviving. I'd forgotten that I used to be more than just Marcus's blind wife who needed to be taken care of." Daniel pulled up a chair beside her, not touching but close enough to offer presence. "You were never just that. That's just what he told you, until you believed it. How do I stop believing it? You make something, and then you make something else, and eventually you've made so many things that the evidence of who you actually are is too overwhelming to deny." Elena nodded, taking a shaky breath, and turned back to the wire in her hands. Her fingers began to move slowly at first, then with increasing confidence, bending and shaping and creating something that existed only in her mind until her hands brought it into being. Daniel watched for a moment, then left her to her work, marveling at the transformation from the broken woman he'd found at a bus stop to this person who was slowly, painfully, courageously rebuilding herself one small piece at a time. In the kitchen, Lily was doing homework at the table, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration as she worked through math problems. She looked up when Daniel entered, her expression serious. "Dad, is Elena going to be okay?" "I think so, sweetheart. Why do you ask?" "Because sometimes she still looks really sad, even when she's smiling. Like part of her is still stuck somewhere bad." Daniel sat down across from his daughter, once again amazed by her emotional perceptiveness. "You're right. Part of her probably is still stuck. It takes time to come back from something like what happened to her, but she's working on it, and we're helping her." "Do you think she'll stay, after the trial and everything?" "I don't know. That's up to her." "I hope she stays." Lily went back to her homework, apparently considering the matter settled. "I like having her here. The house is less quiet." Daniel thought about that later, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling while the house settled into night around him. The house was less quiet. It was also less empty, less lonely, less like a place where he and Lily were just marking time until something better came along. Elena's presence had changed something fundamental in the atmosphere, had made his too small, too worn house feel like it might actually be enough. From the living room, he could hear the faint sounds of Elena still working, the gentle click of beads against wire, the soft metallic whisper of creation happening in the dark. He closed his eyes and listened, And for the first time in years, Daniel Cross allowed himself to imagine a future that included more than just survival and responsibility. He imagined possibility, and that was something worth fighting for. The first piece Elena completed was a necklace made of copper wire and river stones, each stone wrapped individually and suspended at different lengths to create a cascade effect that moved with weight and intention. She worked on it for 3 days, her fingers remembering techniques she thought she'd lost, muscle memory asserting itself over doubt. When she finally finished, she sat back from the card table and called out to Daniel, her voice uncertain. "I think it's done, but I don't know if it's any good." Daniel came from the kitchen where he'd been helping Lily with spelling homework, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He stood looking at the necklace for a long moment, and Elena felt her anxiety ratchet up with each second of his silence. "Well?" she finally asked, unable to bear the quiet. "Elena, it's extraordinary. The way the stones hang, it's like water falling, like each piece is connected but independent. I don't know how you did that without being able to see it." "You're not just saying that." "I don't just say things, especially not about art." He paused. "Can I show Lily?" Elena nodded, and moments later she heard Lily's feet running down the hallway, followed by a gasp that was purely genuine, untainted by politeness or obligation. "Elena, this is so beautiful. Can I touch it?" "Of course." Elena listened to Lily's small fingers exploring the necklace, tracing the wire work, testing the weight of the stones. "It feels like a secret," Lily said finally. "Like if you wore it, you'd know something nobody else knew." The description was so perfectly accurate to what Elena had been trying to create that she felt tears prick her eyes. This was what she'd missed. Not just the making, but the connection, the way art could communicate something wordless between maker and observer. "Do you want to try making something?" Elena asked impulsively. "I have extra wire and some smaller beads that would be good for learning." Lily's enthusiasm was immediate and infectious, and soon they were sitting side by side at the card table, Elena guiding Lily's hands through the basic techniques of wire wrapping, while Daniel finished dinner and listened to them work. The sound of their voices, Lily's bright questions and Elena's patient answers, filled the house with something Daniel hadn't realized was missing until it was present. Over the following weeks, Elena created more pieces. A bracelet made of twisted silver wire that caught light in ways she could only imagine. Earrings that used tiny bells alongside stones, so the wearer would make music with every movement of their head. A pendant that incorporated different textures, smooth glass, rough stone, cool metal, arranged in patterns that made sense to Elena's fingers even if she couldn't see the visual result. Sarah Chen stopped by one afternoon to review trial preparation and found Elena at her workspace, surrounded by half-finished pieces and spools of wire, her face more animated than Sarah had seen since they'd met. "You're working again," Sarah said, and there was satisfaction in her voice. "Trying to. I don't know if anyone will want to buy them, but it feels good to make things again." "Have you thought about selling them?" "There are online platforms for artisan jewelry. I could help you set something up." Elena's hands stilled on the wire she'd been shaping. "I wouldn't know how to manage an online store. I can't see to upload photos or write descriptions or... That's what accessibility software is for. And what friends are for." Sarah pulled out her tablet. "I've been doing some research. There are jewelry makers who are blind who run successful online businesses. They use screen readers, dictation software, work with photographers who understand how to shoot tactile art. It's completely doable if you're willing to learn the technology." "I don't know anything about technology. Marcus always said I was better off without it, that it would just confuse me." "Marcus was a lying piece of garbage who wanted to keep you dependent," Sarah said bluntly. "The question isn't whether Marcus thought you could do it. The question is whether you want to try." Elena sat very still, turning the idea over in her mind. A business. Her own business. Built on her own terms, selling work that came from her hands and her vision. It felt impossible and necessary in equal measure. "I want to try," she said finally. What followed was a crash course in adaptive technology that left Elena frustrated and exhausted and strangely exhilarated. Sarah brought over a laptop with screen reading software, teaching Elena how to navigate websites by sound instead of sight, how to dictate text and have it read back to her, how to use tactile markers and audio cues to organize digital files. It was like learning a new language, and Elena had never been good with languages, but she persisted because the alternative was accepting that Marcus had been right about her limitations. Daniel helped in his own way, setting up a photography area in his garage with proper lighting and backgrounds, learning through trial and error how to shoot jewelry in ways that highlighted texture and craftsmanship. He'd never considered himself artistic, but he understood angles and light from years of carpentry, and he translated that understanding into photographs that captured Elena's work in ways that surprised both of them. "Tell me what this looks like," Elena said one evening, holding up a necklace she'd just completed. "Really tell me. Don't just say it's pretty." Daniel took the necklace, studying it in the light. The stones are various shades of blue and green, like looking at ocean water at different depths. The wire work is intricate, almost lace-like, but it's strong. You can feel the strength even though it looks delicate. The way you've arranged everything, it has movement even when it's still, like it's waiting to be worn, to come alive with someone's movement. "Is it something someone would actually want to wear?" "Elena, I think someone would fight to wear this. I think this is the kind of piece people save up for because it means something beyond just being jewelry." She ducked her head, uncomfortable with praise but unable to completely hide her pleasure. "I want to make more. Different styles. See what works, what doesn't. Build up enough inventory that if I did open a store, there'd actually be something to sell." "Then that's what you do." "It feels selfish. Spending all this time on something that might not even work while I'm living in your house, taking up space." "You're not taking up space, you're filling it. There's a difference." Daniel set the necklace down carefully. "And art isn't selfish. Creation isn't selfish. You're making something beautiful that didn't exist before. That's valuable even if you never sell a single piece." Elena started to respond, but they were interrupted by Lily's appearance in the doorway, her face streaked with tears, her small body shaking with the kind of sobs that spoke of real distress rather than minor childhood drama. Daniel was on his feet immediately, scooping her up. "Baby, what's wrong? What happened?" It took several minutes for Lily to calm down enough to speak coherently. When she finally did, the story came out in gasping bursts. There was a girl at school, Emma, who'd been her best friend since kindergarten. But lately Emma had been spending more time with other girls, forming a group that didn't include Lily, laughing at inside jokes Lily didn't understand. Today Lily had tried to join them at lunch, and Emma had told her she couldn't sit there anymore, that their table was full, that maybe Lily should find other friends. "And I don't know what I did wrong," Lily sobbed against Daniel's shoulder. "I tried to be nice, I tried to be good, but she doesn't want to be my friend anymore, and I don't understand why." Daniel held his daughter, feeling his heart break with the particular pain of watching your child experience hurt you can't fix. This was the part of parenting that never got easier, the moments when you realized that no matter how much you loved your child, you couldn't protect them from the small cruelties of a world that didn't always value kindness. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. Sometimes people change, and sometimes friendships change with them. It doesn't mean you're not valuable or lovable. It just means Emma is figuring out who she is, and right now that doesn't include being the friend you need." "But it hurts," Lily said, the words muffled against his shirt. "I know it does, and it's okay to hurt. It's okay to be sad and angry and confused. Those are all normal feelings when someone you care about pulls away." Elena spoke from her position at the card table, her voice quiet but clear. "Lily, can I tell you something?" Lily lifted her head from Daniel's shoulder, sniffling. "Okay. When I was about your age, I had a friend named Rebecca. She was the first person who never treated me differently because I was blind. She'd describe things to me, but not in a pitying way, just matter of fact, like she was sharing information I might find interesting. We were inseparable for 2 years. What happened? She got invited to a birthday party for one of the popular girls, and the girl's mother told Rebecca she could come, but I couldn't because they were doing activities that wouldn't be appropriate for someone with my disability. Rebecca went to the party without me." Lily's eyes went wide. "That's mean." "It was. And it hurt so much I thought I might die from it. I couldn't understand how someone who was supposed to be my friend could just leave me behind like that." "Did you stop being friends?" "Eventually, but not right away. I tried to pretend it was okay, that it didn't matter. But it did matter, and every time she chose other friends over me, it hurt a little more. Until finally, I stopped trying. And that hurt too, but it was a different kind of hurt. The kind that comes from respecting yourself enough to walk away from people who don't value you. Lily was quiet for a moment, processing this. Did you find new friends? Some. It took time. And I had to learn that not everyone who's nice to you will be your friend. And not everyone who's your friend will be nice all the time. Real friends, the ones worth keeping, they show up even when it's hard. They choose you even when there are easier options. Like Daddy chose to help you? Elena's breath caught. Yes, like your daddy chose to help me when it would have been easier to drive past. Lily nodded slowly, then looked up at Daniel. Will you help me figure out how to be okay without Emma? Every day, baby, for as long as it takes. They spent the rest of the evening in the kind of quiet companionship that only happens after emotional storms. Lily curled between Daniel and Elena on the couch, Daniel reading aloud from Lily's current favorite book, Elena's fingers absently working a piece of wire while she listened. It was domestic and simple and more healing than any of them had words to express. Later, after Lily had finally fallen asleep and Daniel had carried her to bed, he returned to find Elena still on the couch, the wire piece completed and sitting in her lap. Thank you, he said, sitting down beside her, for what you told Lily about your friend. That helped. I wasn't sure if it would. Sometimes kids don't want to hear that adults went through the same things. Sometimes they need to hear it, need to know they're not alone in feeling hurt. Elena nodded, her fingers tracing the wire piece in her lap. I made this while we were sitting here. It's for Lily, if you think she'd want it. She held out a small bracelet, simple but elegant, made of copper wire woven into a pattern that created strength through repetition. Daniel took it carefully, feeling the weight of it, the intentionality in every twist and loop. She'll love it. But Elena, you don't have to make her something every time she's upset. You don't have to earn your place here through gifts. I know, but I wanted to make her something because she's important to me, because she made me feel human again when I'd forgotten what that felt like. Elena paused, her voice dropping. Is that okay? That she's important to me? More than okay, it's... Daniel struggled to find words for the complicated gratitude he felt. It's everything. Lily's never had another adult in her life who wasn't family or paid to be there. Having you here, having someone who chooses to care about her, that matters. I do care about her, about both of you. Elena's face was tilted toward him, and even though she couldn't see his expression, Daniel felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with sight. This house, being here, it's the first place I've felt safe in years, maybe ever. And I know that's a lot to put on you, this responsibility of being someone's safe place, but I don't know how else to say it. You don't have to say it any other way. And it's not a burden, Elena. Having you here, it's changed things for us too. Made us feel less like we're just getting through each day and more like we're actually living. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the house settling around them, Lily's quiet breathing audible from her room down the hall. Eventually, Elena spoke again. The trial starts in 3 weeks. I know. I'm terrified. That's normal. What if I can't do it? What if I get up there and I can't speak, or I break down, or I forget important details because my mind goes blank? Daniel shifted on the couch to face her more directly. Then Sarah will be there to help you, and the prosecutor will walk you through it. And if you need a break, they'll give you one. But Elena, you're stronger than you think. You survived being abandoned. You survived losing everything. You survived marriage to a man who spent years trying to make you believe you were worthless. Talking about it in court? That's nothing compared to what you've already endured. It doesn't feel like nothing. I know. But you're not alone in it. Whatever you need, if you need me to be there or not be there, or help you practice your testimony, or just sit with you when you can't sleep, I'm here. We're here. Elena's hand found his on the couch cushion between them, her fingers cold and trembling slightly. Daniel squeezed gently, offering presence without pressure, and they sat that way until Elena's breathing steadied and the trembling stopped. The 3 weeks before the trial passed in a strange blur of normalcy punctuated by moments of acute anxiety. Elena met with Sarah and the prosecutor multiple times, reviewing her testimony, practicing answers to questions she knew were coming, and preparing for ones she didn't. She learned the layout of the courtroom through careful description and repeated visits, memorizing where she'd sit, where Marcus would be, where the jury would watch her tell the story of her own destruction. Daniel took time off work to drive her to these preparations, sitting in waiting rooms with legal magazines he didn't read, being present in case she needed him. He watched her grow stronger and more fragile in turns, watched her steel herself for what was coming while simultaneously falling apart at unexpected moments. One afternoon, a week before the trial, Elena had a complete breakdown in Sarah's office. The prosecutor had been walking her through cross-examination, playing devil's advocate, asking the kinds of questions Marcus's defense attorney would ask. He'd pushed too hard, suggested too strongly that Elena's blindness made her an unreliable witness, that she couldn't be sure of what had really happened because she couldn't see, and Elena had simply shattered. Daniel found her in the courthouse bathroom afterward, sitting on the floor, sobbing so hard she was gasping for air. He didn't ask permission, just sat down beside her on the cold tile, pulled her against his chest, and let her cry until she had nothing left. "I can't do this," she said when she could finally speak. "I can't get up in front of a room full of people and tell them about the worst things that ever happened to me while Marcus sits there watching, judging, probably still thinking he can manipulate his way out of this." "Then don't do it for him. Don't do it for the jury or the judge or anyone else in that courtroom. Do it for yourself. Do it because you deserve to tell your truth and have it matter." "What if it doesn't matter? What if they don't believe me?" "Then we deal with that if it happens. But Elena, they will believe you. Because you're telling the truth, and the truth has a weight that lies can't match." She stayed there on the bathroom floor for another 10 minutes, Daniel's arms around her, his steady presence the only thing keeping her from completely unraveling. When she finally pulled herself together enough to stand, her face was blotchy and her hands were shaking, but there was something determined in the set of her jaw. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I can do this." "Yes, you can." The night before the trial, Elena couldn't sleep. Daniel found her in the living room at 2 a.m, sitting at her card table with wire and stones spread before her, working on a piece with the frantic energy of someone trying to outrun their own thoughts. "Want some company?" he asked. She nodded without stopping her work, and Daniel settled into the chair beside her, watching her hands move with practiced precision even while her mind was clearly elsewhere. "Tell me about the piece you're making," he said after a while. Elena's hands paused, then continued. "It's a necklace. Heavy. Multiple strands. I'm using hematite. It's dense, substantial. You can feel the weight of it. And I'm incorporating chainmail technique, linking each piece individually so the whole thing moves like fabric, even though it's made of stone and metal." "Sounds complicated." "It is. That's why I'm making it. If I focus on the complexity, I don't have to think about tomorrow." "What happens tomorrow?" "I tell a room full of strangers about the worst moments of my life. I let Marcus's lawyer try to make me sound confused and unreliable and mentally unstable. I put my trauma on display and hope it's compelling enough to convince 12 people that what happened to me actually matters." "It matters," Daniel said quietly. "It mattered the night I found you. It matters now. It will matter regardless of what happens in that courtroom." Elena's hands stilled completely. "Do you ever wonder if you made a mistake, stopping for me that night? Your life would be simpler if you'd just driven past." "Simpler isn't better. And no, I don't wonder. Not even a little." "Why not?" Daniel thought about how to answer that, about all the ways Elena's presence had changed his life and his daughter's life and the fundamental texture of their days. He thought about coming home to a house that felt lived in instead of just occupied, about Lily's laughter when Elena described the jewelry pieces she was working on, about the quiet satisfaction of helping someone rebuild themselves from ruins. "Because you were worth stopping for," he said finally. "You are worth stopping for, not because of what you've been through or what you might become, but because you're you. Complicated and talented and brave and scared and all of it at once, and my life is better with you in it." Elena turned her face toward him, and in the dim light of the living room lamp, Daniel could see tears tracking down her cheeks. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, either of you. You don't have to deserve kindness. You just have to accept it. She nodded, unable to speak, and went back to her work. Daniel stayed with her until dawn, keeping silent vigil while she channeled her fear and anxiety into creation, and when the sun finally rose and it was time to face what came next, they faced it together. The courthouse was exactly as intimidating as Elena had feared. Sarah met them at the entrance, guiding Elena through security and up to the courtroom where they'd spent so many hours preparing. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in financial crimes and exploitation cases, was already there, reviewing notes and looking grimly determined. "How are you feeling?" Jennifer asked Elena. "Terrified." "Good. That means you understand what's at stake." Jennifer's voice softened slightly. "But Elena, you're ready. You know your story. You know the truth. Just tell it the way you told it to me. Don't embellish. Don't minimize. Just tell the truth exactly as you experienced it." The courtroom filled slowly. Jurors filed in, their faces carefully neutral. The judge entered, commanding immediate respect. And then Marcus was brought in, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Daniel made in a month, his face arranged in an expression of wounded innocence that made Daniel's hands curl into fists. Elena couldn't see Marcus's face, but Daniel watched her entire body go rigid when she heard the sound of his presence, the particular cadence of his walk, the small sounds of him settling into his chair at the defense table. She knew he was there, and that knowledge was enough to trigger every defense mechanism she'd built. Daniel reached over and took her hand, squeezed it once, then let go. Elena straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and when her name was called to testify, she stood and made her way to the witness stand with careful, measured steps that spoke of dignity earned through suffering. The oath was administered. Elena placed her hand on a book she couldn't see and swore to tell the truth. And then Jennifer Walsh began to ask questions, and Elena began to tell the story of how she'd been systematically isolated, manipulated, stolen from, and ultimately abandoned to die. Her voice shook at first, but it grew steadier as she spoke. She described meeting Marcus, described the courtship that had seemed so perfect, described the slow erosion of her independence as he took control of her finances and her social connections. She described discovering the theft, confronting him, being driven to an abandoned bus stop, and left there with false promises of safety. The courtroom was absolutely silent as she spoke, every word landing with the weight of truth that couldn't be denied. Daniel watched the jurors' faces shift from neutral attention to horror to anger as they understood the scope of what had been done to her. Then came the cross-examination. Marcus's defense attorney was a slick man named Richard Brennan, who specialized in making victims sound unreliable. He started gently, establishing Elena's blindness, her dependence on others for certain tasks, her lack of visual confirmation for many of the events she described. "Miss Moore, you can't actually be certain my client drove you to Route 47, can you? You couldn't see where you were going." "I could tell by the time elapsed and the sound of the road surface. I've been blind my entire life. I know how to navigate by sound and time." "But you couldn't see the bus stop." "I could feel it. The bench, the shelter. I've lived in this area for years. I knew where I was." "And you say my client told you a bus was coming?" "Yes." "But there are no recordings of this conversation. No witnesses. It's just your word against his." "Yes." "And isn't it true, Ms. Moore, that you've struggled with depression in the past?" "I've struggled with being married to a man who stole from me and tried to kill me. If that caused depression, it seems reasonable." A few jurors actually smiled at that, and Daniel watched Brennan's face tighten with frustration. He tried several more approaches, suggesting Elena had been confused about the timeline, implying she'd misunderstood Marcus's intentions, questioning whether she'd actually been in danger or had simply wandered off from a legitimate care facility. But Elena held firm. Every question she answered with calm clarity, refusing to be shaken, refusing to accept Brennan's attempts to reframe her trauma as confusion or mental illness. When she finally stepped down from the witness stand 3 hours later, she was visibly exhausted but intact. Sarah guided her back to the prosecution table, and Daniel watched Elena's hand shake as she sat down, the adrenaline draining away now that the worst was over. The trial continued for 2 more days. Financial experts testified about the stolen money. The police officer who'd responded to Daniel's call described Elena's condition when he'd arrived. Daniel himself testified about finding her, about her physical state, about what she'd told him that first night. Even Lily was called to testify briefly, describing how Elena had been when she arrived at their house. Scared, cold, clearly traumatized. Marcus never took the stand. His attorney relied on reasonable doubt, suggesting alternative interpretations of events, implying Elena had been confused rather than abandoned. But the evidence was too strong, Elena's testimony too compelling, the financial records too damning. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, Elena sat with her hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles were white, Sarah on one side and Daniel on the other. The foreman stood and read the verdict on each count. Guilty of financial exploitation, guilty of theft, guilty of attempted murder, guilty of abandonment of a vulnerable person, guilty on all counts. Elena's breath left her in a rush, and she bent forward, pressing her forehead to the table in front of her, her whole body shaking with relief so profound it looked like collapse. Sarah rubbed her back while Daniel kept his hand on her shoulder, grounding her, reminding her she wasn't alone. Marcus's face went ashen as the verdict was read, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. He looked over at Elena with an expression that might have been disbelief or might have been rage. And for a moment Daniel thought he might try to speak, to say something to the woman he'd tried to erase. But the bailiff was already moving to take him into custody, and whatever Marcus might have said died unspoken as he was led away to await sentencing. Outside the courthouse, Elena stood in the afternoon sun, her face tilted up toward the warmth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sarah stood nearby, giving her space to process, while Daniel waited with Lily, who'd been remarkably patient through the whole ordeal. "Is it over?" Lily asked quietly. "The trial is. Sentencing will be in a few weeks. But yes, sweetheart, the hard part is over. Can we go home now?" Daniel looked at Elena, still standing with her face toward the sun, and thought about what home meant now. Not just a physical space, but a feeling, a sense of safety and belonging that had grown organically over the past few months. He thought about his too small house, with its worn carpet and squeaky door, and how it had become something more than just shelter. "Yeah," he said, wrapping his arm around Lily's shoulders. "We can go home." Elena finally turned from the sun, and the expression on her face was complicated. Relief and exhaustion, and something else. Something that might have been the first stirring of actual peace. She made her way over to where they stood, and Lily immediately took her hand. "You were so brave," Lily said seriously. "The bravest person I ever saw." Elena's face crumpled slightly, but she smiled through it. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you, without both of you." "That's what families do," Lily said matter-of-factly. "They help each other be brave." Daniel watched something shift in Elena's expression at the word family, watched her process what Lily had just offered without even realizing the magnitude of the gift. Then she nodded, squeezed Lily's hand, and together the three of them walked to Daniel's truck and drove home through afternoon traffic, leaving the courthouse and the trial and the worst of the nightmare behind them. The weeks following the verdict felt like learning to breathe in a new atmosphere. Elena moved through Daniel's house with a lightness that hadn't been there before, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at unexpected sounds, but there was a fundamental difference in her presence now. She was no longer just surviving, no longer waiting for the next terrible thing to happen. Marcus was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The judge had been unsparing in her remarks, calling his actions a calculated betrayal of the most vulnerable kind, exploitation disguised as care. Elena hadn't attended the sentencing hearing. She told Sarah she didn't need to be there, didn't need to see Marcus one more time to know that justice had been served. She was done giving him space in her life, even the space required for closure. Instead, she spent that day in Daniel's garage workshop, setting up a proper jewelry-making station. Daniel had cleared out an entire corner, built her a custom workbench at exactly the right height, installed task lighting that helped her sense of spatial awareness even if she couldn't see the light itself. He'd organized storage for her materials using different textures and containers, creating a system she could navigate entirely by touch. "You didn't have to do all this," Elena said when he showed her the finished space, her fingers exploring the smooth wood of the workbench, the careful organization of drawers and bins. "I know, but I wanted to. You needed a real workspace. not a card table in the living room. Daniel paused, watching her map the space with her hands. Besides, if you're going to turn this jewelry thing into a real business, you need proper infrastructure. I still can't believe I'm actually doing this. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. And now I'm standing in a workshop planning a business, making things again. Her voice caught slightly. How did I get here? You got here by refusing to stay where Marcus tried to leave you, by choosing to fight even when it would have been easier to give up. Daniel moved closer, his presence steady beside her. And by letting people help you when you needed it. Elena turned toward him, her expression serious. I need to talk to you about that. About helping. About everything. Something in her tone made Daniel's chest tighten with an anxiety he couldn't quite name. Okay, want to sit down? They moved to the 2 folding chairs Daniel kept in the garage for when he needed to take breaks from long projects. Elena settled into one, her hands knotted together in her lap, and Daniel could see her gathering courage for whatever she needed to say. I've been thinking about getting my own place, she said finally. Now that the money's been recovered and I have access to my accounts again, I could afford a small apartment, something accessible, somewhere close by so Lily could still visit. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, even though he'd known this conversation was coming eventually. Of course, Elena would want her own space. Of course, she wouldn't want to live in someone else's house forever, dependent on their charity and goodwill. It made perfect sense, and yet the thought of the house without her presence felt unbearably empty. Is that what you want? He asked, keeping his voice carefully neutral. I don't know what I want. That's the problem. Elena's hands twisted together more tightly. Part of me thinks I should want independence, my own space, proof that I can take care of myself. That's what everyone expects, right? The survivor gets her life back, moves into her own place, builds a successful business, and lives happily ever after on her own terms. But the truth is, I don't want to leave. I love it here. I love having breakfast with you and Lily every morning. I love the sound of Lily practicing her reading. I love hearing you work in the garage while I'm making jewelry. I love... She stopped, took a breath. I love feeling like I'm part of something instead of just existing on the margins of my own life. Daniel sat very still, afraid that if he moved or spoke, he might break whatever fragile thing Elena was trying to build with her words. But I also don't want to overstay my welcome, she continued. Don't want to become a burden you're too kind to ask to leave. Don't want to assume that just because this works for now, it's sustainable long term, and I definitely don't want to... Don't want to what? Elena's face was turned toward him, and even though she couldn't see his expression, Daniel felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with sight. Don't want to misunderstand what this is, what we are. You've been so good to me, and Lily's become so important to me, and I need to know where the boundaries are before I accidentally cross them. Daniel took a slow breath, trying to organize thoughts that had been forming slowly over months into something coherent. What if I don't want boundaries? What if I want you to stay, not as a temporary guest, but as someone who lives here because this is where you belong? Daniel, let me finish, please. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, searching for the right words. When I stopped that night, when I saw you at that bus stop, I wasn't thinking about anything except helping someone who needed help. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. You became more than that. And I know the timing is complicated, and I know you're still healing from what Marcus did, and I know it might seem like I'm just some savior complex idiot who can't tell the difference between helping someone and actually caring about them. I don't think that, Elena said quietly. Then what do you think? She was quiet for a long moment, and Daniel could see her processing, weighing, trying to find truth in the complicated tangle of gratitude and genuine feeling. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I think I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me because the last time I loved someone, he tried to kill me. And I don't know how to trust my own judgment anymore. What if I'm just confusing gratitude with love? What if I'm just dependent and scared and latching onto the first person who's shown me kindness? What if I'm making another terrible mistake? Daniel felt his heart hammering against his ribs, hope and fear and determination, all warring for dominance. Those are all fair questions, and I don't know how to answer them except to say that I'm falling in love with you too, and I'm terrified for different reasons. I'm scared of pushing you before you're ready. I'm scared of taking advantage of your vulnerability. I'm scared that you'll wake up one day and realize you don't actually want this life with me and Lily, that you just needed it temporarily while you got back on your feet. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think your concerns are going to happen either. But Elena, we don't have to figure everything out right now. We don't have to make any big decisions or put labels on things or know exactly where this is going. What if we just keep doing what we're doing? You stay here because you want to, not because you have to. We figure out what we are to each other by being it, not by trying to define it first. Elena's face did something complicated, relief and uncertainty and hope all flickering across her features. And if it doesn't work? If we try this and it turns out we were wrong? Then we deal with it like adults, with honesty and respect and care for each other's well-being. But Elena, I don't think we're wrong. I think what we have is real, and it's worth exploring without being paralyzed by fear of what might go wrong. She nodded slowly, and Daniel watched the tension begin to drain from her shoulders. Okay, we try. We stay. We figure it out as we go. Yeah? Yeah. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the magnitude of what they'd just acknowledged settling over them like a blanket. Finally, Elena spoke again, her voice lighter. I should probably tell you something else. About the business. What about it? Sarah helped me set up an online store last week. I posted 12 pieces, all the ones you photographed. They sold out in 3 days. Daniel sat up straighter. What? All of them? All of them. And I have 17 commission requests. People want custom pieces. Elena's face showed a mixture of disbelief and pride. I thought maybe a few people would buy something out of pity or curiosity, but these are real customers who actually want my work because they think it's beautiful. It is beautiful. I've been telling you that. I know, but I thought you were just being nice. Turns out the entire internet agrees with you. She paused. I'm going to need to work full-time to keep up with demand. And I'll need to hire someone eventually to help with the administrative stuff. Order tracking, shipping, customer communication. Things that are possible with adaptive technology but time-consuming. That's amazing, Elena. You're building something real. We're building something real. I couldn't do any of this without your help. The workshop, the photography, the encouragement when I was ready to give up, that's all you. No, that's all you. I just provided space and basic support. The talent, the vision, the courage to try again after everything you've been through, that's yours. Elena smiled, and it was the first fully unguarded smile Daniel had seen from her, bright and genuine and completely free of the shadows that had haunted her since that first night. We make a good team. Yeah, Daniel said, feeling something settle into place in his chest, something that felt like the future taking shape. We really do. That evening they told Lily. She'd been doing homework at the kitchen table when they came in from the garage, and she looked up with the kind of intuitive awareness that children sometimes have when adults are about to say something important. Is something wrong? She asked, her eyes darting between them. Nothing's wrong, Daniel assured her. Actually, something's very right. Elena's going to stay here, not just for a little while, but for as long as she wants. This is her home now, too. Lily's face lit up with the kind of pure joy that only children could muster, uncomplicated by adult concerns about propriety or logistics. Really? You're not leaving? I'm not leaving, Elena confirmed, and found herself swept into an enthusiastic hug that nearly knocked her off balance. This is the best news ever. Can we celebrate? Can we make a special dinner? Can I show you my new book? Can we... Lily, breathe, Daniel said, laughing. Yes, we can celebrate. Why don't you pick what you want for dinner and we'll make it together? Lily chose spaghetti and meatballs, and the three of them crowded into the small kitchen, Lily chattering excitedly about everything they could do now that Elena was staying permanently. Elena helped with the cooking, her movements in the kitchen now confident after months of practice, while Daniel supervised and tried not to let his happiness show too obviously on his face. After dinner, Lily insisted on teaching Elena a card game that involved more rules than seemed strictly necessary and a lot of creative interpretation. Daniel watched them play, watched his daughter explain the game with elaborate hand gestures Elena couldn't see but responded to anyway through pure context, and felt a completeness he hadn't experienced since before his wife died. This was what home was supposed to feel like. Not perfect, not without complications, but full of warmth and laughter and people who chose each other. Later, after Lily was asleep, Daniel and Elena sat on the front porch steps, listening to the night sounds of the neighborhood. It was late October again, almost a full year since that rainy night when everything had changed and the air carried the same cold promise of winter approaching. "Do you ever think about that bus stop?" Elena asked. "About what would have happened if you hadn't stopped?" "Sometimes, usually in the middle of the night when I can't sleep." Daniel stared out at the quiet street. "I think about all the ways that night could have gone differently. If I'd been 5 minutes earlier or later, if I'd taken the main road instead, if I'd convinced myself it was safer to just call 911 and keep driving. Would you have done things differently if you could go back?" "Not a single thing. Every choice I made that night led to this, to you being here, safe and whole, to Lily having you in her life, to us having whatever this is we're building together." He paused. "Would you?" Elena considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, I would have said I'd change everything. Would have never met Marcus, never trusted him, never let myself be vulnerable to someone who would use that vulnerability against me. But now, she stopped, choosing her words carefully. Now I think maybe all those terrible things had to happen exactly the way they did to bring me here. And as much as I hate what I went through, I wouldn't trade where I ended up. That's very philosophical for someone who almost died. Maybe almost dying gives you perspective on what actually matters. Elena turned her face toward him, and Daniel was struck again by how expressive she was, despite not being able to make eye contact. "You matter, Daniel Cross. You and Lily. This life we're building. It matters more than the fear or the pain or the uncertainty about whether I'm making the right choices." Daniel reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "For what it's worth, I think you're making excellent choices. Even falling for a carpenter with a too small house and a mountain of medical debt? Especially that." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "I don't have much to offer except stability and really good pancakes and a daughter who thinks you hung the moon. And yourself," Elena added quietly. "You offer yourself. Your patience and kindness and the way you make me feel safe without making me feel helpless. That's not nothing, Daniel. It's not a fortune or a mansion or any of the things someone like you deserves. Someone like me deserves exactly what I have. A home where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can see or what I can give. A place where my work is respected. A family that chose me instead of tolerating me." She paused. "That's everything. That's more than I ever thought I'd have." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the street settle into full darkness. A car passed, its headlights sweeping across them briefly before disappearing around the corner. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked, and a child called out something about bedtime. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. The sounds of a neighborhood where nothing terrible was happening, where people were just living their ordinary lives. The jewelry business grew faster than any of them had anticipated. Within 3 months, Elena had a waiting list of 6 weeks for custom pieces. Within 6 months, she'd been featured in an online magazine about disabled artists who were redefining their crafts. Within a year, she'd hired 2 part-time assistants, one to handle administrative work and another to help with finishing work on pieces that required visual inspection. Daniel watched her transform from someone who'd barely believed she could create anything worthwhile into a confident businesswoman who knew exactly what her work was worth. She negotiated with suppliers, managed client expectations, built a reputation for extraordinary craftsmanship that people were willing to wait months to receive. She did all of it without apology, without minimizing her disability, simply working within and around it with the same matter-of-fact competence she'd always had, but had forgotten she possessed. The house changed too. Daniel and Elena repurposed the living room into a dual workspace, her jewelry bench on one side, his drafting table on the other. They worked companionably in the evenings, the sounds of their respective crafts creating a kind of domestic symphony. Lily would do homework at the kitchen table, calling out questions that either adult could answer, completely comfortable with the arrangement that had become their normal. Mrs. Chen continued to help with childcare, but less out of necessity now than because she'd grown genuinely fond of all three of them and claimed they kept her from becoming a boring old woman who only watched cooking shows. She'd taken to commissioning pieces from Elena, bracelets for her granddaughters, a necklace for her sister-in-law's birthday, and had become one of Elena's most enthusiastic promoters in the neighborhood. Daniel's carpentry business stabilized and then grew as word spread about his work. He found himself getting better clients, more interesting projects, the kind of custom furniture building that actually felt like art rather than just labor. He credited Elena for the change, said that watching her create beautiful things had reminded him why he'd chosen carpentry in the first place, for the satisfaction of making something with his hands that would last. 18 months after that rainy October night, Daniel came home from a job site to find Elena and Lily in the garage workshop, both bent over Elena's workbench, working on something together with intense concentration. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching, feeling the same surge of gratitude and wonder he'd felt that first night when he'd chosen to stop. "What are you two making?" he asked finally. Lily looked up, her face bright with excitement. "It's a secret project. You can't see until we're done." "I'm being taught the basics of wire wrapping," Elena added, and there was amusement in her voice. "Apparently my technique needs work according to my very exacting 9-year-old apprentice." "She's a good teacher," Lily said seriously, "but I have high standards." Daniel laughed, moving into the workshop to see what they were working on. It appeared to be a bracelet, more ambitious than the simple pieces Lily had made before, with multiple strands woven together in a pattern that was clearly Elena's design but executed with Lily's careful, unpracticed hands. "It's for you," Lily said, abandoning any pretense of it being a secret. "For Father's Day. Elena designed it, but I wanted to make it myself so you'd know I put work into it." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You didn't have to do that, sweetheart. I wanted to, because you're the best dad, and you deserve something made special." Lily looked back at the bracelet critically. "Elena says it's going to take me another week to finish because I have to be very careful with the small parts. Then I'll wait patiently for a week." Daniel looked at Elena over Lily's head, and something passed between them that didn't need words, acknowledgement of how far they'd all come, gratitude for the family they'd built from pieces that had seemed broken beyond repair. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel and Elena sat on the porch again, a habit they'd developed over the past year. The weather was warm now, late spring sliding into early summer, and the air was full of the smell of flowers from Mrs. Chen's garden next door. "I need to tell you something," Elena said, and her tone was serious enough to make Daniel's heart rate pick up. "Okay. Should I be worried?" "No. Maybe. I don't know." She took a breath. "I got a call from a gallery in the city today. They want to feature my work in a show about adaptive artists. 3 months from now. Opening night, artist meet and greet, the whole thing." "Elena, that's incredible. Why do you sound worried about it?" "Because they want me to tell my story. Not just show the work, but talk about why I make it, where I came from, what I've overcome." She paused. "They want me to talk about Marcus, about being abandoned, about how trauma informed my artistic vision." "And you don't want to?" "I don't know if I want to. Part of me thinks my work should stand on its own without needing the backstory of suffering to make it meaningful. But another part of me thinks maybe there's value in being honest about where I've been, and helping other people understand that disability and trauma don't have to define you." Daniel considered this carefully. "What does Sarah think?" "She says it's my choice. But she also says there's power in controlling your own narrative, in telling your story before someone else tells it for you." "She's right about that." Daniel shifted to face Elena more directly. "But I think the real question is whether you're ready to talk about it publicly, whether you've healed enough that sharing the story won't reopen wounds that are still closing." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on her knee in the unconscious gesture she made when she was thinking deeply. "I think I'm ready. Or at least, I think I'm as ready as I'm going to be. And maybe sharing it will help someone else who's going through something similar. Maybe they'll see that you can survive the worst thing imaginable and still build something beautiful afterward. Then do it. Tell your story. Show your work. Let people see both the art and the artist who made it." Will you come? To the opening? Elena, I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world. Me and Lily both, if she's allowed. She's definitely allowed. She's part of the story, too. You both are. Elena reached over and found Daniel's hand, her fingers intertwining with his in the easy familiarity of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. None of this exists without you choosing to stop that night. The business, the art, the life I have now, it all starts with you deciding I was worth stopping for. You were always worth stopping for. I just happened to be the one who did it. The gallery show was everything Elena had feared and hoped for simultaneously. The space was beautiful, her pieces displayed with careful attention to lighting and presentation that made them look like precious artifacts rather than handmade jewelry. A crowd gathered, larger than Daniel had expected, moving through the exhibit with the kind of quiet reverence people reserve for art they didn't quite understand but knew was important. Elena stood near the entrance, Lily beside her holding her hand with the fierce protectiveness of someone who understood her job was to keep Elena grounded. Daniel stayed close but gave them space, watching as person after person approached Elena to comment on her work, to ask questions about her process, to share their own stories of disability or trauma or creative recovery. When it came time for Elena to speak, she moved to the small raised platform at the center of the gallery with more confidence than Daniel had seen from her in the courtroom. Sarah stood nearby, ready to intervene if needed, but Elena didn't need intervention. She needed to tell her story, and she was finally ready to do it. 2 years ago, I was sitting at an abandoned bus stop in the rain, waiting to die, she began, her voice steady and clear. I'd been left there by someone I trusted, someone who'd spent years convincing me I was worthless and helpless and better off gone. I'd believed him. I'd internalized every cruel thing he'd said, every manipulation he'd used to control me. And sitting there in the dark and the cold, I thought he was right. The gallery had gone completely silent. Every person present focused entirely on Elena's words. But someone stopped. A stranger who had every reason to keep driving decided I was worth the risk of getting involved. He brought me into his home, gave me space to heal, and never once asked for anything in return except that I keep trying, that I keep living, that I remember I had value even when I couldn't see it myself. She paused, and Daniel watched her hand move to the necklace she was wearing, the first piece she'd made in his garage, the copper and river stone cascade that Lily had said felt like a secret. The pieces in this show are made by someone who learned to see herself differently, not through eyes, but through the work of her hands, through the patience of people who refused to let her disappear, through the slow, painful process of rebuilding a life that had been systematically destroyed. Elena's voice strengthened. I make jewelry because it's the only language I have for expressing what survival looks like when you're blind. Every piece is a map of texture and weight and the way different materials support each other. Every piece is evidence that broken things can be made whole again if you're willing to do the work. When she finished speaking, the applause was immediate and sustained. Daniel watched tears stream down her face as she accepted the recognition, as she let herself feel the magnitude of how far she'd come. Lily squeezed her hand and whispered something Daniel couldn't hear, and Elena smiled through her tears and nodded. Later, after the crowd had thinned and they were preparing to leave, a young woman approached Elena hesitantly. She was maybe 22, with the careful movements of someone who wasn't entirely comfortable in public spaces. Excuse me? I just wanted to say, your story really resonated with me. I'm recovering from something similar. Different circumstances, but the same kind of thing where someone I trusted tried to erase me. She paused, gathering courage. I didn't think I'd be able to create anything again, make anything that mattered, but seeing your work, hearing how you rebuilt yourself, it makes me think maybe I can too. Elena reached out, found the young woman's hand, and squeezed it gently. You can. It won't be easy, and it won't be fast, but you can. And when you do, when you make that first thing that comes entirely from you instead of from your trauma, it'll be extraordinary. The woman nodded, thanked Elena with a voice thick with emotion, and moved away. Daniel watched the interaction and understood something fundamental about why Elena had chosen to share her story. It wasn't about garnering sympathy or making her art more marketable. It was about reaching back into the darkness she'd escaped from and offering light to people who were still lost in it. On the drive home, Lily fell asleep in the back seat almost immediately, exhausted from the excitement and the late hour. Elena sat quietly in the passenger seat, processing everything that had happened, and Daniel gave her the space to think. Finally, she spoke. I didn't expect it to feel that good. Telling the truth about what happened, I thought it would feel like exposing myself, like being vulnerable in a way that wasn't safe. But instead it felt like I was taking something back, taking ownership of my own narrative. You were powerful up there, Daniel said. Honest and strong and completely yourself. Everyone in that room felt it. Did you feel it? Yeah, I felt proud of you. Proud of how far you've come, proud to be part of your story. Elena turned her face toward him, and even in the darkness of the truck cab, Daniel could see the emotion on her face. I love you. I should have said it before now, but I was scared. Scared of being that vulnerable again. Scared of giving someone that much power over me. But I love you, Daniel Cross. And I'm done being scared of saying it. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his heart hammering in his chest. I love you too. Have for a while now. Was just waiting for you to be ready to hear it. I'm ready, for all of it, for whatever comes next. What comes next is we go home, put Lily to bed, and figure out the rest as we go. Same as we've been doing. That sounds perfect. 3 months later, on a crisp October morning, exactly 2 years after Daniel had stopped at that abandoned bus stop, he woke to find Elena already up, sitting on the edge of the bed with something in her hands. The early morning light filtered through the curtains, and Daniel could hear Lily still sleeping in her room down the hall. What are you doing awake? He asked, his voice rough with sleep. Elena turned toward him, and he could see she was holding a small box, her fingers tracing its edges with the kind of careful attention she gave to all things that mattered. I made something for you, and I wanted to give it to you before the day got started, and we got caught up in everything else. Daniel sat up, suddenly more awake. You made something for me? Open it. Inside the box was a ring. Not a wedding ring exactly, but something more personal. A wide band made of layered metals, copper and silver twisted together in a pattern that created strength through the joining. It was beautiful and masculine, and clearly made with extraordinary care. Elena, let me say this before I lose my nerve. She took a breath. 2 years ago, you stopped for me when everyone else would have driven past. You gave me shelter and safety and space to heal. You never asked for anything except that I keep trying. And somewhere in all of that, you gave me something else. The ability to imagine a future that included love and trust and family. Daniel's throat was too tight to speak, so he just listened, holding the ring carefully in his palm. I know this isn't traditional. I know usually the man asks the woman, and maybe we should wait longer, and maybe this is too fast or too complicated or too many things at once. Elena's voice wavered slightly, but held steady. But I also know that life is short and unpredictable, and sometimes you have to take the risk of saying what you mean before you lose the chance. So I'm asking you, Daniel Cross, will you marry me? Will you let me be part of this family officially? Will you take the risk of building a future with someone who comes with complications and nightmares and a jewelry business that takes over half the garage? Daniel found his voice, rough with emotion. Yes, to all of it. The complications and the nightmares and the jewelry business and every single part of you. Yes. Elena's face broke into the kind of smile that transformed her entire being, and Daniel slid the ring onto his finger. It fit perfectly, because of course it did. Because Elena worked by touch and knew the dimensions of his hands as well as she knew her own. He pulled her close, kissed her with all the tenderness and promise he couldn't put into words, and thought about how strange and wonderful it was that the worst night of both their lives had led to this moment. They told Lily over pancakes, which seemed appropriate given the role pancakes had played in their developing relationship. Lily's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic, involving considerable jumping and squealing and immediate plans for a wedding that included at least 1,000 flowers and a dress for Elena that she could help pick out. Does this mean Elena is going to be my mom? Lily asked after the initial excitement had settled. Daniel and Elena exchanged a glance, the question hanging between them with all its complexity. Finally, Elena spoke. I'm going to be your stepmom, which is different from being your mom, but not less important. Your mom will always be your mom, even though she's not here anymore. but I'll be the person who's here now, who loves you and your dad and wants to be part of your family. Is that okay with you?" Lily considered this with the seriousness she gave to all important matters. "Will you still teach me jewelry making?" "Of course." "And read to me sometimes?" "Whenever you want." "And help me with science projects?" "Absolutely." "Then yes, that's very okay with me." Lily paused. "Can I call you Elena, Mom?" Elena's eyes filled with tears, and her voice was thick when she answered, "I would be honored if you called me Elena, Mom." The wedding happened 6 months later, a small ceremony in Mrs. Chen's backyard garden with only the people who mattered most. Sarah Chen served as maid of honor, having become not just Elena's advocate, but her genuine friend. Lily was the flower girl, taking her job with utmost seriousness. Mrs. Chen herself orchestrated the entire event with the efficiency of a military general, claiming that someone needed to make sure things were done properly. Elena wore a dress that incorporated some of her own jewelry, a necklace and earrings she'd made specifically for the occasion, pieces that caught light and made music with her movements. Daniel wore a suit he'd bought for the occasion, and the ring Elena had given him months earlier, now accompanied by a matching wedding band that Lily had helped Elena make. When it came time for vows, Elena spoke first, her voice steady and clear despite the emotion she was holding. "Daniel, you stopped for me when the world said to keep driving. You saw value when I couldn't see it myself. You gave me space to heal and time to grow and the courage to imagine a future I thought was impossible. I promise to choose you every day for the rest of our lives, to be your partner in everything, to love you and Lily with everything I have, to build a life with you that honors where we've been and celebrates where we're going." Daniel's vows were simpler, but no less meaningful. "Elena, you walked out of darkness and into our lives and made everything brighter. You showed Lily what courage looks like. You reminded me that helping people isn't a burden, it's a privilege. I promise to be worthy of your trust, to protect your heart the way you've protected ours, to be your partner and your friend and the person who always stops when you need someone." When they kissed, Lily cheered with the enthusiasm of a 9-year-old who'd just witnessed the best thing she'd ever seen, and Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue while insisting she wasn't crying, she just had allergies. The reception was exactly as informal as Elena had wanted. Food from everyone's favorite local restaurants, music from a Spotify playlist Lily had curated, and dancing in the grass with fairy lights strung overhead. Daniel watched his new wife dance with their daughter, both of them laughing as Lily tried to teach Elena some complicated moves she'd learned in gym class, and felt a completeness so profound it almost hurt. Sarah approached with 2 glasses of champagne, handing one to Daniel. "You did good, Cross. Really good." "We did good. You, me, Elena, Lily. Everyone who refused to let her disappear." "You know what I think about sometimes?" Sarah said, watching Elena and Lily spin in dizzy circles. "I think about that bus stop, about how many people probably drove past before you stopped, how many people saw something wrong and decided it wasn't their problem. I think about that too. Makes you wonder how many other people are sitting in metaphorical bus stops right now, waiting for someone to stop, waiting for someone to care enough to get involved." Daniel nodded, understanding what she was saying. "That's why I started volunteering." Sarah turned to him with surprise. "You did?" "A few months ago. At a shelter for people leaving abusive situations. Just basic carpentry work, fixing things that break, building furniture, making spaces feel more like homes and less like institutions." He paused. "Elena's going to start teaching jewelry making classes there too. Give people a skill, something they can do with their hands that might become income." "That's incredible. It's what you do when someone stops for you. You stop for other people. You pass it forward because you remember what it felt like to be the one waiting in the rain." The party continued into the evening, neighbors joining in as word spread that there was celebrating happening in Mrs. Chen's garden. Elena held court near the dessert table, describing her jewelry-making process to anyone who asked, her face bright with happiness and the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and being comfortable with it. Later, after the guests had gone and Lily had been tucked into bed in Mrs. Chen's guest room for the night, Daniel and Elena walked back to their house. Their house now. Officially, legally, permanently. They stood on the front porch for a moment, looking at the modest building with its worn paint and squeaky door, and Daniel thought about all the ways this house had been transformed from a place where he and Lily just survived into a home where 3 people thrived. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked, sensing his contemplation. "I'm thinking about that bus stop, about how that one choice to stop changed everything, not just for you, but for all of us." Elena leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you think it was fate? That you were meant to find me that night?" "I don't know about fate, but I know that when you're faced with a choice between helping someone or keeping your life simple, choosing to help is almost always the right answer." He wrapped his arm around her waist. "Even when it's complicated, even when it's hard, even when you can't see where it's going to lead. Where do you think this is leading? Us? This life we're building?" Daniel thought about Lily asleep at Mrs. Chen's house, about the garage workshop where 2 different crafts coexisted in harmony, about the future stretching out before them with all its possibilities and uncertainties. He thought about how far they'd all come from that rainy October night, how much healing and growing and learning had happened in the space between then and now. "I think it's leading exactly where we want it to go. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage at a time." He kissed the top of her head. "I think we're going to be extraordinary together." "We already are," Elena said simply. And standing there on the porch of their too-small house in their modest neighborhood, holding the woman who'd been left to disappear and had instead chosen to bloom, Daniel knew she was absolutely right. They were already extraordinary, not because their story had been easy or clean or followed any kind of traditional path, but because they'd all chosen to stop when it would have been easier to keep going, chosen to care when indifference was simpler, chosen to build something beautiful from the broken pieces they'd been handed. The old bus stop on Route 47 remained abandoned, its broken roof still leaking, its rotted bench still unusable. But it stood now not as a monument to cruelty, but as a reminder that one person's choice to stop, to care, to help, one single decision made in a moment of cold rain and exhaustion could change the trajectory of multiple lives forever. Some people would drive past, but some people would stop. And sometimes that made all the difference in the world.